You're listening to the Alpha's love stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1: The letter that should have burned the wind that night didn't howl, it whispered. It slipped through the cracks in my cabin walls like a secret no one wanted to keep. And I, Eris Thorne, was writing a secret of my own. My fingers were stained with angry ink, my heart a furious drum against my ribs. The candlelight bled across the rough wooden table, making the words on the parchment pulse with a life they shouldn't have had. Tyrant, arrogant, blind king, every word was a hot coal spat from the hearth of my frustration. This letter was never meant for royal eyes. It was a scream into a void named Kalen, my oldest friend, a messenger who knew how to listen and forget. He understood the rage of the borderlands. He would burn this letter after reading it, and we would share a bitter laugh about the state of the kingdom. That was the plan. I signed my name with a slash of the quill, Eris, just Eris, the forgotten she-wolf of the pines. I folded the parchment, sharp and final. Tomorrow I would give it to the carrier bound for Kalen's post. For now I left it on the table, a sleeping serpent of treason, and went to check on my little brother. Elian was only 12, sleeping fitfully, his brow furrowed even in dreams. Our parents were 5 years gone. It was just us against the cold, and against a crown that felt increasingly like a weight around our necks. The next morning dawned gray and urgent. A bark from Old Man Heron's sheepdog meant wolves were near the flock. I grabbed my bow, shouted to Elian to bolt the door, and ran out into the mist. The chase took hours. By the time I returned, muddy and breathless, the sun was high. I pushed open the cabin door, my mind already on food and rest, and I stopped. The air inside was wrong, colder, emptier. My eyes flew to the table, the letter, it was gone. A cold fist closed around my heart. No, it couldn't be. I swept the table clean, searched under it, scoured the packed earth floor. Nothing. Panic, sharp and metallic, flooded my mouth. I ran outside, checking the damp ground for footprints other than mine. Nothing clear. Then I remembered. Lyra Vance, the commander's flawless daughter with her honey-blonde braids and dagger-sharp smiles. I'd seen her at the Crossroads Tavern yesterday. She'd brushed past my table, her fingers trailing over the wood. She'd asked about the weather, her eyes everywhere but on my face. I'd thought nothing of it. Why would I? Now the pieces crashed together with terrible, perfect clarity. Lyra had seen the letter. She had taken it. 10 years ago, she was the reason I'd been forced to leave the Royal Guards, trials and disgrace, branded weak and unstable. A cup of water from her hand, a sudden, debilitating illness the next morning. I'd always known, and I'd always been powerless. Now she held more than my past in her hands. She held my future, my life. If that letter reached him, King Thuron of the Silver Citadel, the man I'd called a tyrant and wished would fall from his own tower, I sank onto the bench, my legs useless. The silence in the cabin was no longer empty. It was full of impending doom. It was the quiet before the storm breaks. What had I done? I'd handed my greatest enemy the perfect blade to gut me with, wrapped in my own foolish pride. The rest of the day was a blur of dread. Every snap of a twig outside was a royal guard. Every gust of wind was the gallop of distant horses. Elian asked me twice what was wrong, and I forced a smile so brittle I thought my face would crack. Night fell again. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I just sat by the cold hearth, staring at the door, waiting for it to splinter inward. And then I heard them, not the wind, not the wolves. Hooves, heavy, rhythmic, and many. They thrummed through the ground, up through the soles of my feet, into the very core of me. They were coming from the Kingsroad. They were coming here, my breath hitched, trapped in my throat. Elian was asleep. I moved on wooden limbs to the window, peeling back the deerskin curtain just a sliver. Torchlight. A dozen points of fire bobbing in the darkness, cutting through the mist like angry eyes, and at their head, a figure on a massive, midnight black horse. Even at this distance, silhouetted against the torch flames, he was unmistakable. The breadth of his shoulders, the way he sat his saddle, not as a rider but as if he and the beast were one singular force of will. King Thuron, he was here. The procession halted in the small clearing before my cabin. The guards fanned out, a semicircle of grim-faced men and women in silver-studded leathers. The king dismounted. The movement was fluid, powerful. He did not look at his guards. He did not speak a command. He simply stared at my door, and then he began to walk toward it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird trying to escape a cage. This was it. No trial, no questions. He would break down the door and have me dragged away in chains. Elian would wake to see his sister taken by the king he'd been taught to revere. I backed away from the window, my back hitting the rough wall. My hand flew to the simple hunting knife at my belt. It was a toothpick against a dragon. Useless. But it was all I had. He didn't pound, he didn't shout. One heavy, deliberate knock echoed through the small space. It was a sound of finality. Eris Thorn, his voice, oh his voice, it wasn't the roar I expected. It was low, calm. A river of dark ice flowing under a deceptively still surface. It vibrated through the wood of the door and into my bones. Open this door. It was not a request, it was the last order before the avalanche falls. I looked at the door. I looked at the hallway leading to where Elian slept. What choice did I have? Fleeing would condemn him. Defiance would spark violence right here. With a trembling hand, I reached for the latch. The iron was cold as death. I took a breath that did nothing to steady me, and I pulled the door open. The night air rushed in, snuffing out my single candle, plunging us into the unstable dance of torchlight from outside, and there he stood, filling the doorway, blotting out the world. King Thuron. Up close, the stories and distant memories did him no justice. He was taller, broader. His hair, black as a raven's wing, was tied back, revealing a face that seemed carved from granite by a ruthless hand, a strong jaw set in a hard line, a straight nose. And eyes, his eyes were the color of a winter storm, a piercing pale gray that saw everything and gave nothing back. They held no immediate fury, only a terrifying, focused intensity. In his hand, held between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a dead insect, was a crumpled piece of parchment. My letter. Does this, he said, his storm-colored eyes locking onto mine, pinning me in place, belong to you? The world narrowed to that piece of paper, to those eyes, to the pounding of my own blood in my ears. I opened my mouth. No sound came out. He took one step inside. The cabin shrank around him. You called me a tyrant. He didn't read it. He recited it. The words dropped into the silence like stones into a deep well. You wrote that I rule from a tower of pride, that I am blind to the mud and blood of my own borders. He unfolded the letter slowly, the sound unbearably loud. You said you hoped the winds of justice would someday knock me from my high perch. He looked up from the paper, and his gaze was a physical weight. Tell me, Eris Thorn, were you speaking for yourself, or for all the forgotten wolves of the hinterlands? This was the moment to crumble, to beg, to deny, but the fear crystallized into something else, something hard and sharp, a desperate, reckless courage. The words tore from me, raw and ragged. I was speaking the truth. A truth you never hear, wrapped in silk and lies in your silver hall. My brother and I nearly starved last winter while your tax collectors took our last sack of grain. Where is the king in that? Where is the protector? I was shouting now. I couldn't stop. So yes, that paper is mine, every cursed word. Do what you will with me, but the truth doesn't burn, your majesty. It waits. I braced for the blow, for the order, for the end, but it didn't come. King Thuron didn't move, he didn't roar. He simply watched me, as if I were a strange, feverish bird that had flown into his chamber. The torchlight flickered in his eyes, and for a second, just a second, I thought I saw something there beyond the ice. A spark of not anger, something else. He slowly crumpled the letter again, his fist closing around it. Interesting, he said, his voice still that low, measured tone. No one has ever said such things to my face and lived to finish the sentence. He turned, his cloak swirling, and walked back to the doorway. He paused, a silhouette against the night. You will come to the Silver Citadel, he said, not looking back. It was not an invitation, it was a decree etched in stone. You will look upon the Tower of Pride and tell me if your opinion holds. In 3 days' time my guards will fetch you. He finally glanced over his shoulder, and his stormy gaze swept over me, from my worn boots to my defiant, terrified face. Do not be late, Eris Thorn. The truth, as you say, waits, but my patience does not. And with that he was gone. The torches receded, the hoofbeats faded into the forest. I stood there in the dark, the cold night air swirling around me, the ghost of his presence still choking the room. He hadn't arrested me, he hadn't punished me, he had summoned me. And I knew, with a certainty that froze my very soul, that going to the Silver Citadel would be far more dangerous than any prison. What does a king want with a she-wolf who cursed him? The question hung in the dark, unanswered and more terrifying than any threat. The game was set, and I had just been made a player in a match I didn't understand. Chapter 2, The Road of Stone and Memory. 3 days. The king's words were a clock ticking in my mind, each beat a heavy thud of dread. I spent them in a frantic, silent haze. I mended my sturdiest boots. I packed a small satchel with a change of clothes, a hunk of hard cheese, and my mother's silver comb, a foolish comfort, but I needed it. I tried to prepare Elian. I have to go away for a little while, I told him, my voice too bright like a painted mask. The king has asked for my counsel on border matters. The lie tasted like ash. Elian, 12, but with eyes that saw too much, just stared at me. You shouted at the king, Eris. I heard you through the wall. He doesn't ask for counsel from people who shout at him. He swallowed hard. He punishes them. My heart cracked. I pulled him into a hug, inhaling the scent of pine and boyish sweat. Listen to me. Whatever happens, you stay with old man Heron. Do everything he says. Practice your letters. I will send word. I will come back. I made the promise into a prayer, pressing it into his hair. The morning of the third day dawned cold and clear. I was dressed, my satchel by the door, my stomach a knot of cold snakes. I watched the Kingsroad from the window. When would they come? How many? Would they drag me in chains? They arrived at noon, not a squad of brutal guards, but two. A man and a woman, their armor polished but not ostentatious, the king's crest, a howling wolf against a mountain etched on their breastplates. They dismounted with efficient grace. The woman, her dark hair braided tightly, approached the door. She knocked, firm but not violent. I opened it, my chin lifted, hiding the tremor in my hands. Eris Thorne, her voice was neutral, professional. Yes, I am Captain Varia. This is Lieutenant Roran. By order of King Thuron, we are to escort you to the Silver Citadel. She assessed me in one swift glance. Are you prepared to depart? This civility was somehow more unnerving than brutality. I am, I said, my voice thin. I turned for one last look at Elian, who stood in the doorway to the back room, his small face pale. I gave him the strongest smile I could muster and a firm nod. Then I walked out, closing the door on my old life with a soft, final click. They had brought a third horse, a sturdy, calm mare. No chains, no bonds, just a saddle. The implication was clear. I was going of my own will, even if that will was a fiction. As I mounted, I saw curtains twitch in nearby cabins. Faces, pale and fearful, watched the king's guard take the Thorn girl away. Shame and a strange, defiant pride warred within me. We rode in silence. The familiar pine forests of the borderlands gradually thinned, giving way to rocky hills and wider paths. The Kingsroad itself began here, a ribbon of ancient, fitted stone that spoke of a power that could command mountains. With every hoofclack on that stone, I felt further from home, further from myself. Captain Varia finally spoke as the sun began to sink, painting the sky in fiery streaks. You will be housed in the guest quarters of the West Wing. You are not a prisoner, but you are not free to roam. Meals will be brought to you. The king will summon you when he is ready. Ready for what? The question burst from me. Roran, the younger lieutenant, glanced at Varia. She didn't look at me. That is for the king to decide. The silence returned, heavier now. My mind raced. Guest quarters, not a prisoner. It made no sense, unless the public punishment, the spectacle, was to be saved for the citadel. My throat tightened. On the second day of riding, the citadel came into view. It didn't emerge from the landscape, it dominated it. A cluster of slender, impossibly high towers forged from pale, moon-colored stone, clawing at the sky. It glittered coldly in the afternoon light, a beautiful, frozen cage. The sight stole my breath, not with awe, but with a deep, primal dread. This was the heart of the power I had mocked. This was the tower I had wished would fall. We crossed a vast, fortified bridge over a churning river. The gates, towering things of black iron and silver, swung open silently. We entered the outer bailey, a world of ordered stone, bustling servants, and the constant, low hum of disciplined power. Guards patrolled high walls. Grooms took our horses. The air smelled of forge fire, stone dust, and a strange, floral perfume from the inner gardens. I was utterly, completely out of place. My worn clothes, my borderland scent of pine and earth, they marked me as an intruder in this polished machine. Varia led me through a labyrinth of corridors, her boots echoing on flagstones. We passed open archways that revealed courtyards where warriors trained, their movements a deadly, beautiful dance. My feet slowed for a heartbeat. A memory sharp as a shard of glass, myself at 15, training in a yard like that, dreaming of a silver breastplate. Keep moving, Varia said, not unkindly. We entered the West Wing. It was quieter, the halls lined with tapestries depicting historic battles and noble wolves. It felt like a museum of a world I'd been cast out of. She stopped before a heavy oak door, unlocked it, and pushed it open. The room was lovely, a far cry from my cabin. A large bed with a thick wool blanket, a writing desk, a wash basin with a porcelain pitcher, and a window that looked out over a misty inner garden. A fire crackled in the hearth. It was a comfortable cage. Rest, Varia said. Someone will bring your dinner. Do not leave this room. She left and I heard the key turn in the lock. The sound was soft but definitive. I was a guest and I was a prisoner. The duality was dizzying. I went to the window. The garden below was pristine, manicured, empty. Beyond the high walls, I could see the jagged peaks of the mountain range that cradled the citadel. Somewhere beyond those mountains was home, was Elian. A soft knock at the door made me jump. It opened and a young servant girl slipped in, carrying a tray. She kept her eyes down, placing it on the desk. Soup, bread, a slice of meat, an apple, more food than I'd seen in a week. "Thank you," I whispered. She flinched, nodded, and scurried out, the lock turning again. I couldn't eat. The luxury of the room pressed in on me, a velvet smothering. Why was I here? What game was Thuron playing? Was this a cat allowing a mouse to believe it had escaped, only to pounce when the hope was sweetest? Night fell. The citadel was not silent. It groaned. Distant footsteps echoed. The wind whistled around the towers with a lonely, keening sound. I lay on the too-soft bed, staring at the ceiling, every sense screaming. This was worse than a dungeon. The uncertainty was the real trap. Just as the deepest part of the night settled, I heard it, not a groan of stone, not a whisper of wind. Voices in the corridor outside my door, a man's voice low and smooth as oiled leather, and a woman's voice I would know in my nightmares, Lyra Vance. He ensured it was placed directly on his personal desk, the man was saying. He read it immediately. The reaction was not what we anticipated. Lyra's laugh was a soft, cruel chime. "Oh, I anticipated it, Silas. Thuron has always been fascinated by broken things, by defiance. He sees it as a puzzle to be solved. He doesn't crush it, he dissects it." My blood ran cold. Silas Vance, Lyra's brother, the king's own spymaster. "So you believe he brought her here to study her, to break her spirit properly?" Silas asked. "I believe," Lyra said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper right outside my door, "he brought her here to play with her. And when he grows bored, that's when we remind him of his duty, and of the suitable choices for a king's attention." Their footsteps faded away. I sat bolt upright in the dark, my hands clutching the blanket, ice flooding my veins. It was no accident. Lyra had not just taken the letter to get me in trouble. She had orchestrated its delivery, predicting Thuron's curiosity. I was not just a punished subject. I was a pawn in a much larger, darker game between the king and the powerful Vance family, a game about influence, about the future of the throne itself, and I was now trapped at the very center of the board. The comfortable room felt suddenly suffocating, the walls humming with hidden schemes. King Thuron's motives were a mystery, but Lyra's were crystal clear. She had brought me here to be destroyed, to be used as a weapon in her own ascent. The hook was set, the suspense tightened its coil. I was not waiting for a king's judgment alone. I was waiting in the wolf's den with another, more cunning wolf already circling, tasting the air for my fear. Sleep was impossible. The night stretched before me, endless and full of whispers. What would the dawn bring? A summons to the throne room, a private audience, or simply more waiting in this gilded cage while the players moved around me in the shadows? One thing was certain. My letter had started a fire, and I was no longer holding the torch. I was tied to the stake. Chapter 3, Gilded Cages and Shadowed Gardens. Dawn did not bring clarity. It brought a gray, misty light that seeped into my room, making the fine furnishings look ghostly. The servant girl returned with breakfast, porridge sweetened with honey, tea that smelled of distant flowers. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. The lock turned again after she left. The silence was a living thing, thick and watchful. I paced. 5 steps from the bed to the window, 4 steps from the window to the door. My reflection in the polished silver of the wash basin showed a stranger, a pale face, shadowed eyes, hair a wild tangle of silver. The defiant border wolf was gone, replaced by a caged, nervous creature. I needed air. I needed to see the sky that wasn't framed by this stone. I went to the window and pushed it open, leaning out. The inner garden below was still empty, dew glittering on manicured hedges and pale winter blooms. A high wall surrounded it, but the gate was just visible, a wrought iron archway open. An idea, desperate and foolish, took root. I was told not to leave the room, but the window, before fear could talk me out of it, I swung my legs over the sill. The wall was rough-hewn stone with enough cracks and holds for a girl who'd climbed border pines all her life. I climbed down, my heart a frantic drum in my throat, expecting a shout at any second. My boots sank into damp, fragrant earth. I was in the garden. The air was cold and clean, smelling of wet soil and early frost. For a moment I just breathed, the tightness in my chest easing a fraction. This small patch of earth, at least, was real. I walked along a gravel path, my senses hyper-alert. The silence here was different, softer, broken only by the drip of water from leaves. I turned a corner around a tall hedge of dark green and stopped dead. I was not alone. A man stood by a marble fountain, his back to me, looking at the still water. He was tall, dressed not in armor but in a simple, dark gray tunic and trousers. His hair was black, tied back, his posture was relaxed, yet it radiated a latent, coiled power that made the air around him seem heavier. I knew him instantly, the breadth of his shoulders, the way he stood, utterly still as if listening to the earth itself. King Thuron. My breath caught, I took a step back, the gravel crunching under my boot. He turned, slowly. Those storm-gray eyes found me, and there was no surprise in them, only a quiet, unnerving acknowledgement, as if he had known I would come here, as if he had been waiting. "Eris Thorn," he said, his voice was softer here, without the door between us, but it still vibrated with that same undercurrent of absolute authority. "I see you found the garden." I couldn't speak, I was caught, I had broken the first rule. "You were instructed to stay in your room." He stated it as a fact, not an accusation. Eyes needed air, the words were a dry rustle, more than you needed to obey a king's command. He took a step toward me, he didn't seem angry. He seemed curious, like a scholar observing a rare, skittish animal. "What will you do?" The question was out before I could stop it, laced with a defiance I didn't feel. "Have me dragged back in chains, throw me in a true cell." He studied me, his gaze tracing the lines of my face, the tension in my shoulders. "Is that what you expect, what you believe of your tyrant king?" I flinched at the echo of my own words. "I don't know what to believe," I whispered, the fight draining out of me, leaving only bewilderment and fear. "Why am I here, truly?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked past me at the high walls of the garden, then back at my face. "You spoke of a world I do not see. You painted a picture of my kingdom with the brush of anger and the ink of truth." He paused, choosing his words with a care that was more terrifying than any rage. "I would see that picture for myself." "Through your eyes," my mind reeled. "So I am a guide, a pair of eyes." Disbelief colored my voice. "You are a witness," he corrected, his tone turning flinty. "One who is not afraid to testify. That is a rare thing in the citadel. Rarer than diamonds or loyalty." The implication hung between us. His court was full of sycophants and liars, and he knew it. Before I could process this, a new voice cut through the garden's stillness, smooth as silk and cold as the marble fountain. "Your Majesty, I had hoped to find you here." Lyra Vance glided into the clearing, a vision of cultivated grace. She wore a riding outfit of deep emerald, her golden hair braided into a flawless crown. Her smile was perfect, her eyes sweeping over me with a flicker of amused contempt before settling on the king with devoted warmth. "Lady Vance," Thuron acknowledged, his expression smoothing into an unreadable mask. "I was just reviewing the patrol schedules for the Southern Pass," she said, her voice a melodic chime. "The reports are troubling. Bandit activity has increased threefold." Her gaze slid back to me. I couldn't help but overhear. "Is this the border girl, the one who wrote those colorful letters?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "How brave of her to come all this way, and how fortunate the king is so merciful." Every word was a tiny, precise dagger. She was painting me as a foolish, lucky peasant and him as a magnanimous ruler dealing with a nuisance. Thuron's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Eris Thorn is here at my request, Lyra. Her perspective on border matters may prove valuable." "Of course," Lyra purred, dipping her head. "How pragmatic." She turned her full attention to me, and the mask slipped just enough for me to see the venom beneath. "You must find the citadel overwhelming, my dear. All this stone and protocol, so different from the simple freedom of the forests." It was a taunt, a reminder of my place. I found my voice, though it trembled. "The forests teach their own lessons, my lady, about survival, about things that are real, not just polished for show." Lyra's perfect smile froze. Thuron watched our exchange, a faint, unreadable tension in his jaw. "A point well made," Thuron said, his voice cutting the growing chill. "Lyra, you may leave the patrol reports on my desk. I will review them shortly." A dismissal, clear and firm. Lyra's composure didn't crack, but a flush crept up her neck. She bowed. "As you wish, Your Majesty." She turned to go, but not before shooting me a look that promised a later, more private reckoning. When she was gone, the garden felt colder. Thuron let out a slow breath, the first sign of human fatigue I'd seen in him. "You have made an enemy," he stated quietly. "She was already my enemy," I replied, my hands clenched at my sides. "She always has been." He looked at me, and for a fleeting moment the king's mask was gone. I saw a man who was tired, a man surrounded by beautiful, poisonous things. Then you understand the nature of this place better than most who arrive. He moved to leave, then paused. You will join me in the map room this afternoon. We will begin your testimony. Be ready after the noon bell. He didn't wait for an answer. I stood alone by the fountain, the encounter leaving me more unsettled than before. Thuron was an enigma, a tyrant who sought truth, a king weary of his own court. Lyra was a clear and present danger, and I was stuck between them, a mouse who had somehow gained the attention of both the hawk and the snake. The summons had come. Not to a throne room for judgment, but to a map room for a conversation. It was not what I had expected. It was, in many ways, more terrifying. What truths would he demand? And what would happen when my words, once written in angry secrecy, were spoken aloud in the heart of his power? The garden, once an escape, now felt like another layer of the trap. The walls were just as high. The shadows, I now knew, held more than just the cold. I made my way back to the wall, my mind churning. Climbing back into my gilded cage felt like a defeat, but it was the only move I had. As I pulled myself over the windowsill, a single white winter rose lay on the stone floor of my room. It hadn't been there before. Its petals were perfect, its stem thornless. A gift, a warning. There was no note, just a rose, cold and beautiful and utterly silent. Someone had been in my room. Chapter 4, the map room and the unspoken war. The rose lay on the floor like an accusation. I picked it up, its petals cool and velvety against my skin. It held no scent, it was just a thing, a message without words. I can enter your sanctuary, I am watching. I threw it into the hearth. It blackened, curled, and vanished into the flames. The act was small, futile, but it steadied my nerves. The noon bell tolled, a deep, resonant sound that shuddered through the stone of the citadel. It was time. A guard I didn't recognize, a stern-faced woman, arrived at my door. "The king awaits you in the map room," was all she said. I followed her, my footsteps echoing in the vast, hollow corridors. We passed open doorways where courtiers gathered, their conversations dying into whispers as I walked by. I felt their stares like physical touches, curious, disdainful, pitying. The border upstart, the king's odd new project. I kept my eyes forward, my back straight, trying to wear my old defiance like armor. We ascended a spiral staircase, each step taking us higher into the central tower. The air grew cooler. The decor became more severe, less tapestry, more stone, the walls lined with mounted relics of ancient battles, notched swords, shattered shields. The guard stopped before a door of dark, age-blackened wood. She knocked once, then opened it, gesturing for me to enter. The map room was not a room, it was a cavern of knowledge. A circular chamber, its domed ceiling painted with constellations. The walls were not stone, but shelves from floor to dizzying ceiling, packed with scrolls, leather-bound ledgers, and rolled maps. In the center of the room stood a massive, scarred table of oak, currently empty save for a single, large parchment weighted at its corners. And standing beside it, silhouetted against the light from a narrow, high window, was King Thuron. He had changed. The simple tunic was gone. He wore a formal dark blue jacket, the shoulders reinforced with subtle silver embroidery that mimicked wolf fur. He looked every inch the ruler, but his expression was one of intense focus, not ceremony. He was studying the map. "Close the door," he said without looking up. The guard obeyed, shutting me in with him. The sound was terribly final. For a long moment the only noise was the faint whisper of a draft and the beat of my own heart. He finally lifted his gaze. "Come, look." I approached the table slowly, the vastness of the map unfolding before me. It was the kingdom. The silver citadel was a detailed knot of lines in the center. I found the King's Road, a thin thread winding east, and there a tiny, unnamed smudge near the edge of the parchment. That was my forest, my home. It looked so small, so insignificant. "This," Thuron said, his finger tracing the borderlands, a vast shaded area marked with pine trees and the words, "the wilder pine," "is what you speak for. These hundreds of miles, these thousands of lives." His finger moved to a cluster of precise, inked buildings near the citadel. "And this is what I see every day: reports, numbers, grain yields, tax revenues, troop movements." He looked at me, his stormy eyes sharp. "The disconnect, Eris Thorn, is not born of malice, it is born of scale. A king cannot be everywhere, so he must trust systems. He must trust the eyes of others." I found my voice, and when those eyes lie, or when they simply choose not to see, he didn't flinch. Then the system fails and people suffer. He gestured to the map. "Show me, where did your family nearly starve?" The question was so direct, so devoid of royal pomp, it disarmed me. I leaned over the table, my fingers searching the vague wilderness. Here, near the fallen star lake, the village doesn't even have a name on your map, we are just part of the Wilderpine. Describe it. The soil is rocky, the growing season is short, a late frost can wipe out a seedling crop. The royal granary is 3 days hard ride away in Stonewatch. I pointed to a fortified dot on the map. When the tax collector came last autumn, he took our surplus, what little we had saved for the lean months. He said the quota was set and the quota must be met. He did not see that our surplus was our survival. Thuron was silent, his eyes fixed on the spot my finger touched. The quota for that sector was set 5 years ago, he said, almost to himself, after a series of abundant harvests. He walked to a shelf, pulled down a heavy ledger and brought it to the table. He flipped pages with quick, precise movements. The reports from Stonewatch for the last 2 years, they indicate stable yields. No request for quota adjustment was ever filed. Because the governor of Stonewatch lives in a manor house, I said, bitterness seeping into my tone. His fields are in the lowland valleys. He doesn't ride up into the pines to see the frost-scorched earth. He sees full wagons coming down and he reports stability. Thuron closed the ledger. The sound was like a verdict. He paced away from the table, his hands clasped behind his back. One flawed link, he murmured. One man's comfort or neglect or greed and a chain of suffering is forged. He turned back to me. This is the picture you painted. This is the blindness. I nodded, my throat tight. It was one thing to scream accusations in the dark. It was another to stand in the heart of power and have them acknowledged as fact. Why did you not petition? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. A petition requires a scribe, money for paper and ink, time for travel. When you are fighting daily to keep a roof and feed a child, you do not have the luxury of bureaucracy. You have only the luxury of anger. I met his gaze. And sometimes you write a letter you never intend to send. A ghost of something, not a smile but an understanding, touched his eyes. It vanished quickly. The patrols, he said, shifting subjects with a ruler's swiftness. You called them executioners. Explain. I took a deep breath. The King's Guard patrols the roads, yes, but they rarely venture into the deep woods where the real dangers fester, the rogue wolves, the sickness that spreads through isolated hamlets. Instead, they stop travelers on the King's Road, demanding tolls and papers. To a border family trying to take a sick child to a healer, a delayed patrol feels like an execution. Your justice is a distant rumor, your interference is a daily burden. He absorbed this, his expression growing grimmer. You speak of a kingdom within a kingdom. A shadowland I do not rule. You rule it, I said softly, you just don't see it. The silence that fell between us was different now, charged not with fear but with a dreadful, collaborative energy. He was not defending his reign, he was dissecting it. With my words as the scalpel, he moved to a large chest against the wall, unlocked it, and pulled out a different map. This one was newer, marked with red and black ink. This, he said, spreading it over the first, is what my council sees: threats, alliances. The movement of rival packs along our eastern flank. He pointed to a mass of red crosses. This incursion 3 days ago, the one that attacked a supply caravan, your brother was there. My blood ran cold. Elian, how do you? I read all reports, he said simply. Especially those involving the families of guests in my citadel. He fought well. He saved 2 younger children by leading the attackers away. He is being commended. Pride and terror warred in my chest. Elian, my little brother in a battle, commended by the king. The world was tilting on its axis. The point is, Thuron continued, his voice hardening, while you see oppressive patrols, I see a stretched-thin military trying to hold a fracturing border against external and internal decay. Your truth and my truth are not opposites. They are 2 halves of a broken whole. He looked at me and the weight of kingship was in his eyes, a crushing, lonely burden. You asked why you are here, this is why, you hold the other half. And I need to see it if this kingdom is to survive. The admission was staggering. He wasn't toying with me, he wasn't planning a subtle punishment, he was using me, as a resource, as a mirror held up to his blind spots. It was more responsibility than I had ever imagined, and more dangerous, for if I became the voice of the discontented borders, I would make enemies far more powerful than Lyra Vance. I would threaten the very systems that fed the comfort of 100 nobles. As if summoned by the thought, the door to the map room opened without a knock. Lord Silas Vance stood in the doorway, his smile a thin, polite line. He was a taller, sharper version of his sister, with cold green eyes that missed nothing. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. The council is assembled and growing restless. The matter of the eastern incursion requires your directive. Thuron's mask of the thoughtful ruler slid back into place instantly. I will be there momentarily, Silas. Silas's gaze flicked to me, to the map spread between us, and back to the king. There was no hostility in his look, only a calm, analytical assessment, as if I were a new variable in a complex equation. Of course, sire. I shall tell them you are deeply engrossed in strategic review. He gave a slight bow and retreated, closing the door softly. The spell was broken. The king was once again the king, distant and formidable. Our discussion is ended for today, Thuron said, rolling up the maps. You will return to your quarters. Tomorrow you will accompany Captain Varia to the granary and provisioning ledgers. You will look with your borderer's eyes and tell me what you see. It was a command. I was dismissed. As I walked back to the west wing, the guard ahead of me, the encounter replayed in my mind. I had seen a crack in the king's granite exterior, a glimpse of a man who knew his ship was leaking and was desperate for a truthful soundings report. But I had also seen Silas Vance's calculating eyes, and I knew with a sinking certainty that our private meeting in the map room would not remain private. Lyra would know, the council would know, I was no longer just a defiant peasant. I was a tool in the king's hand, and tools, once they have served their purpose, are often discarded or broken by those who fear their use. The game had just become infinitely more complex, and the stakes, they were no longer just my life, they were the truth itself. Chapter 5, Granaries and Ghost Numbers. Captain Varia collected me after the morning meal. Her expression was, as ever, professionally blank. The king has ordered a review of the central granary and provisioning logs. You are to accompany me and provide perspective. We did not speak as we traversed the citadel's underbelly. The polished halls of the west wing gave way to functional, stone-flagged passages that sloped downward. The air grew cooler, smelling of dust, old wood, and the faint, sweet-sour scent of grain. The central granary was not a single room, but a vast, vaulted cellar complex beneath the citadel's eastern grounds. Torches in iron sconces cast a flickering, amber light over a staggering sight, mountains of sacks, labeled and stacked in towering rows that vanished into the shadows. Barrels of salted meat, wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth, casks of oil. It was the physical manifestation of the kingdom's wealth, the lifeblood stored against siege and winter. A thin, nervous man in a steward's robe scurried forward, his ledger clutched to his chest like a shield. Captain Varia. An honor. How may I assist the king's guard? Steward Gerard, Varia said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. This is Eris Thorn. We are here to conduct a visual inventory cross-referenced with your ledgers, starting with the winter wheat and the smoked venison. Gerard's eyes darted to me, widening slightly at my simple clothes, my border accent. Discomfort radiated from him. A visual inventory, but the quarterly audit was just completed by the Exchequer's office. All was in perfect order. The king requests a second set of eyes, Varia said, her tone leaving no room for debate. The ledgers, please. For hours we worked. Varia called out sack markings and barrel codes. Gerard, sweating now, flipped through his ledger, calling out matching entries in a reedy voice. I followed my task to simply look, to see what a borderer would see. At first it was just numbers and sacks, but then my eyes, used to judging the fullness of a trapline or the health of a root cellar, began to notice discrepancies. Row 7, stack 4, Varia called. Marked winter wheat, harvest 12, Stonewatch Mill, 50 sacks. Gerard's finger ran down the page. Yes, 50 sacks, received autumn last year. I stepped closer. The sacks were piled neatly, but the one on the bottom of the stack had a pronounced slump. I bent down, ignoring Gerard's indignant sputter, and pressed a hand against the burlap. It gave way too easily, not full. This sack is less than half full, I said, straightening up. Impossible, Gerard blustered. They are weighed upon receipt. Perhaps it settled into a hollow. I interrupted, moving to the next sack. It was the same. I pointed to the stitching on a third. This seam has been opened and resewn, poorly with different thread. The evidence was plain, ugly. These were not settling sacks. They were pilfered sacks, refilled with maybe chaff or dirt to maintain the shape. Varia's calm mask finally slipped into a sharp, focused intensity. Steward, open it. Captain, I must protest. This is highly irregular. Open it. Now, with trembling hands, Gerard produced a small knife. He slit the stitching I'd indicated. He reached in, pulled out a handful, and let it sift through his fingers. It was not golden wheat. It was a mixture of grayish dust, pebbles, and moldy chaff. The air in the granary turned to ice. Varia's face was stone. How many stacks in this row are from Stonewatch Mill? A frantic, horrifying inventory began. We found not just underfilled sacks but entire stacks that were ghosts, outer sacks of good grain hiding cores of rubbish. The ledger showed pristine numbers, but the reality was a hollow shell. The theft was not petty, it was systematic, brazen, spanning hundreds of sacks meant for border garrisons and famine relief. Jared was weeping now, babbling about following orders, about paperwork that always matched, about never looking too closely. Whose orders? Varia's voice was a whiplash. Though the requisition forms come from the provisioning office, they are signed by the understeward. I just reconcile the numbers. The physical audit is the exchequer's duty. And who is the understeward for provisioning? I asked, the pieces clicking into a dreadful pattern. Jared wiped his nose. It is Lord Barlow's nephew, young Milo Barlow. Barlow. The name was a cannon shot in the silence. Lord Barlow was a member of the King's inner council, a man who had sneered at me in the corridor just yesterday. Varia's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jump. Seal this section, no one in or out. Jared, you will come with me to the guard post. Now. She turned to me, and for the first time I saw something like respect in her eyes, mixed with grim acknowledgement. You have done what the king asked, you have seen what we have learned not to see. Return to your quarters, speak of this to no one. I walked back alone, the dusty, deceptive scent of the granary clinging to my clothes. My mind raced. This wasn't just neglect. This was orchestrated theft, bleeding the kingdom's reserves dry, probably for years, and it led directly to the door of a high noble's family. Thuron's words echoed, one flawed link, a chain of suffering is forged. This was more than a flawed link, this was a gangrene in the kingdom's limb. When I reached my room, I expected to find it empty. I was wrong. Lyra Vance sat in the chair by my cold hearth, as elegant and out of place as a jewel in a mud puddle. She was examining her perfectly manicured nails. What a dreary little room they've given you, she said, not looking up. But I suppose it's an improvement over a forest hovel. Every instinct screamed danger. What do you want? She finally lifted her gaze. Her green eyes were like chips of frozen jade. I wanted to see the king's new pet project for myself. I hear you've been busy poking around places that don't concern you. So, word traveled fast, the Vance spies were efficient. The king asked me to provide perspective, I said, forcing my voice to steadiness. Perspective, she repeated, the word a sneer, a charming euphemism for stirring up trouble. Tell me, little wolf, do you understand what you're playing with? The granaries are not just sacks of grain, they are a delicate ecosystem. Many powerful families have interests there. Contracts, traditions of theft, I shot back. Her smile was venomous. Traditions of management. Of balancing the needs of the center with the appetites of the periphery. You have just kicked a hornet's nest that has been peacefully humming for a decade, and the hornets will not be pleased. She stood, smoothing her gown. My brother Silas believes the king's interest in you is a passing curiosity, a ruler's whim. I am not so sure. I think you are a spark, and sparks in a room full of old, dry timber are exceptionally dangerous. She walked to the door, then paused. A word of advice from one she-wolf to another. When the hornets swarm, they do not distinguish between the one who kicked the nest and the one who merely stood nearby. You have a brother, do you not? Elian, such a promising young warrior. It would be a tragedy if something unforeseen were to befall him during training. A loose saddle cinch, a misfired arrow. Pure, undiluted terror iced my veins. If you touch him, she interrupted, her hand on the latch, her expression one of innocent surprise. I would never. But accidents happen in the heat of combat, do they not? Especially when one is distracted by worrisome news from home. Her meaning was clear, back down, or Elian pays the price. She left, the door clicking shut, leaving me in a silence ringing with threat. The trap was no longer just around me. It was closing around my brother, my brave, foolish brother who was earning commendations and making himself a target. I had found a cancer in the kingdom. And in doing so, I had given the cancer a reason to strike back at the one who exposed it, through the person I loved most. The king sought truth, but the truth I was learning had teeth, and it bit the hands that dared to uncover it. What would Thuron do with the evidence of the granary? Would he move against Lord Barlow? Could he, without triggering the hornet's nest Lyra warned of? And what would I do to keep Elian safe? Would I silence my own tongue, betray the king's fragile trust? Or would I fight and risk everything? The rose had been a warning. Lyra's visit was a declaration of war, and I was standing on the battlefield, unarmed and alone. Chapter 6. The Midnight Belfry. Lyra's poison hung in the air of my room long after she left. Her threat against Elian was a blade held to my throat. I paced, my thoughts a frantic swarm. Should I go to Thuron, tell him what I'd found and what it had cost? Would he protect a border boy against the might of the Vance family? Or would my brother become a pawn in a game too large for me to understand? The official summons never came. No guard arrived to take me to the king for a debrief on the granary. The silence from the rest of the citadel was profound, eerie. It felt as if the stone itself was holding its breath. As dusk bled into full night, a different message arrived. It was not delivered by a person. I heard a faint scritch at the base of my door. When I looked, a slender strip of parchment had been slipped underneath. My heart hammered as I picked it up. The handwriting was bold, sharp, and unfamiliar. The North Belfry, the midnight hour, come alone, speak of this to no one. T.T. Thuron, but why this secrecy? Why the Belfry of all places? It was in the oldest, disused part of the citadel, a place of drafts and ghosts. Was it a trap, a trick by Lyra or Silas to lure me into a compromising, lonely place? Or was it the king, needing to speak away from the walls that had ears and the servants who were spies? The risk was monumental, but the threat to Elian was immediate. If this was Thuron, it might be my only chance to plead for my brother's safety. If it was a trap, well, I was already in the lion's den. What was one more risk? I waited until the corridors fell into the deep quiet of the late watch. Wrapping myself in my darkest cloak, I slipped out of my room. The west wing was still. I moved like a shadow, my border-honed senses hyper-alert to every distant footfall, every sigh of the wind. The path to the North Tower took me through forgotten galleries where portraits of stern ancestors stared down with dusty disapproval. The air grew colder, the torchlight more sparse. I climbed a narrow, spiraling staircase that seemed to have no end, my footsteps the only sound in the immense, ringing silence. Finally, I reached a small, wooden door warped with age. I pushed it open. The belfry was a stone platform open to the night sky. The great, silent bell hung in the center like a slumbering beast. The wind here was a living thing, howling through the arches, tugging at my cloak and hair. The view was terrifying and magnificent, the entire citadel spread below like a model carved from moonlight and shadow, the black forests beyond a sea of darkness. He was there, a tall, cloaked figure standing at the far edge, looking out. He turned as I entered, the moonlight catching the sharp planes of his face. It was Thuron. The tension in my chest eased a fraction, then coiled again, tighter. "Why here? You came," he said. His voice was almost swallowed by the wind. "You commanded it," I replied, pulling my cloak tighter. "I requested it, there is a difference." He took a step closer. In this wild, open space he seemed less like a king and more like a part of the ancient night itself. Captain Varia gave me her report. "And Steward Gerard has elaborated under questioning. Then I know the scale of the rot," he said, his voice low and fierce. "I know that the food meant for your village, for a dozen villages, lined the pockets of Barlow's kin and their allies. I know the ledgers are fiction." He turned his stormy gaze fully on me. "What I do not know is what Lady Vance said to you after your discovery." I froze. How could he know about that? He saw my shock. "These stones have cracks." "And some cracks whisper. What did she say, Eris?" The directness stripped away my pretense. The fear for Elian burst out. "She threatened my brother. She said accidents happen in training. She told me to stop stirring the hornet's nest." A muscle jumped in Thuron's jaw. A flicker of raw, unkingly anger flashed in his eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a colder, more calculating fury. "I see, so the theft is not just greed, it is a web, and the spiders are now trying to silence the fly that stumbled into it." "What will you do?" My question was a whisper torn by the wind. "What I must," he said, turning back to the view, "but it must be done with precision." A public accusation against Lord Barlow now, based on the word of a panicked steward and a border girl, would split the court. It would give the Vance family and their allies the perfect crisis to exploit. They would rally around Barlow, call it a power grab, a conspiracy against the old nobility. He looked at me, his expression grim. "They would paint you as my provocateur, a liar sowing discord, and your brother would become a casualty in the unfortunate unrest." The truth of it was a cold stone in my gut. He was right. Exposing the truth could get Elian killed and plunge the kingdom into civil strife. "So we do nothing. After what we saw, we do not do nothing," he said, his voice cutting through the gale. "We act in the shadows as they do. Gerard will be quietly relocated. The granary will be secretly restocked from the royal reserves. Milo Barlow will be reassigned to a post so distant and freezing he will wish he'd never seen a sack of grain. The leak will be plugged. Silently, it was smart, it was pragmatic, it was the move of a king who understood the brutal chessboard of power, but it felt like a betrayal. And justice for the villages that went hungry. Justice, Thuron said, the word heavy with irony, is a luxury of stable times. My first duty is to ensure there is a kingdom for those villages to be part of. This is not a victory, it is a strategic retreat. To fight a war, you must first secure your camp. He turned to me fully now, his gaze intense. But you have my word, Eris Thorn, this is not an end, it is the first move. When the time is right, when the balance shifts, they will answer for it, every last one of them. Your brother will be protected, I will see to it personally. He will be assigned to Captain Varia's own unit, she is unimpeachable. No accident will befall him under her watch. The promise was like a rope thrown to a drowning woman. It didn't pull me to shore, but it gave me something to cling to. He was not ignoring the threat, he was maneuvering around it. Why tell me this? I asked. Why the secrecy? You are the king. You could have just ordered it done. Because you deserve to know, he said, and the simple honesty of it was more shocking than any royal decree. You uncovered the truth, you earned the right to see its consequences, and because, he hesitated, a rare thing for him. Because I need you to understand the battlefield you are on. It is not just maps and grain sacks. It is whispers in dark corners and knives aimed at the heart from smiling faces. If you are to be my eyes, you must see this too. He took a final step toward me, close enough that I could see the weariness etched around his eyes, the weight of 1,000 such secret, ugly decisions. Can you do that? Can you trust my word, even when you cannot see my hand moving the pieces? The wind screamed around us. Below, the kingdom slept in ignorance. Here, at the top of the world, a king and a border girl made a pact in the dark. I looked into his eyes, searching for the tyrant I had written to. I saw a ruler, yes, hard, cunning. But I also saw a man shackled by his own throne, fighting a war on a dozen invisible fronts. He was offering me a place in that war, not as a prisoner but as an ally, a dangerous, fragile alliance. My defiance had brought me here. My love for my brother would keep me here. I nodded once. I will trust your word, and I will keep watching. A faint, grim nod was his reply. Good, return to your room, act as if nothing has changed, grieve the truth that could not be spoken. Let them think they have won this round, it will make the next victory sweeter. I turned to leave, the immensity of the conspiracy settling on my shoulders. Eris, his voice stopped me at the door. I glanced back. He was a silhouette against the starry void again. The letter you wrote, you wished for a wind of justice to knock me from my tower. I flinched, waiting for the reprimand. You were not wrong to wish for justice, he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. You were only wrong about the method. Justice is not a wind, it is a tide, and tides move slowly, but they are inexorable, and they wash everything clean in time. I slipped back into the dark staircase, his words echoing in my mind more powerfully than any bell. I had come to the citadel expecting a trial. I had found instead a war council on a windy tower. The enemy was not the king, the enemy was a sickness within his own house, and I had just enlisted in the long, silent campaign to cure it. The walk back felt different. The shadows were no longer just threatening, they were alive with secrets, some malignant, some possibly, just possibly, on my side. When I reached my room, I found a second piece of parchment on the floor. This one bore a single, elegant letter embossed with a stylized V. It was an invitation to a royal hunt in 3 days' time. All the court would be there, signed by Lady Lyra Vance, mistress of the hunt. The game, it seemed, was far from over. A new move had already been made. Chapter 7, The Royal Hunt. The invitation was a gilded snare. To refuse would be an insult to the court and a sign of fear. To accept was to walk into Lyra Vance's chosen arena. There was no choice. 3 days later, I found myself in the frenetic bustle of the citadel's main courtyard at dawn, surrounded by a spectacle of wealth and power I could scarcely comprehend. Horses stamped, their coats gleaming like polished metal. Lords and ladies laughed in silks and fine leathers, their hunting bows more ornament than tool. The air crackled with excitement and a cruel, playful energy. I wore simple, sturdy riding clothes provided from the citadel's stores, dark green wool and serviceable boots. I stood out like a thistle in a bouquet of roses. Lyra, of course, was the most dazzling rose of all. She sat astride a spirited white mare, dressed in hunter's leathers so expertly tailored they looked painted on. She held a beautiful recurve bow with casual grace. Her eyes found me across the yard. She smiled, a flash of white teeth, and gave a slow, mocking nod. Welcome to my game. King Thuron emerged then, and the courtyard fell into a respectful hush. He was dressed for the hunt in dark leather and gray wool, a longbow in his hand. He looked every inch the warrior king, his gaze sweeping over the assembly with detached authority. It settled on me for a fraction of a second, a look that was not recognition but a cold, royal assessment. The mask was back, firmly in place. The man from the belfry was gone. "The forests are generous," Thuron announced, his voice carrying easily. "Respect the kill, watch your companions." We ride, the hunt erupted into motion. I was given a steady, unremarkable bay gelding. I mounted, my border's instincts taking over, assessing the animal, the terrain, the mood of the crowd. This was not hunting for food. This was a pageant of violence. We streamed out of the gates, a river of color and noise crashing into the quiet autumn woods. The pace was breakneck, a mad gallop along manicured trails. Lords whooped, ladies shrieked with false alarm. The hounds bayed, a frantic chorus. I hung back, keeping to the edges, my senses screaming. This chaos was a perfect cloak for an accident. The quarry was a stag, a magnificent, ancient beast with a crown of antlers. It was driven toward us by beaters, its sides heaving, eyes wide with terror. The true hunt, the chase began. The group splintered, following the stag's desperate path deeper into the forest. The trails became narrower, the trees denser. The civilized noise of the court faded, replaced by the raw sounds of the chase, pounding hooves, snapping branches, the harsh pant of the hounds. I found myself separated in a dim, quiet stretch of pine, the perfect place. I heard the horse before I saw it, coming up fast behind me, not on the path but crashing through the underbrush. I urged my gelding forward, but my mount was no match for the powerful charger that surged alongside me. It was Lyra. Her face was alight with a fierce, predatory joy. "Getting lost, border girl," she called over the thunder of hooves. "The woods can be so disorienting." She didn't have a bow in her hand. Instead, she held a long, wicked-looking hunting crop. As our horses ran neck and neck, she leaned over and brought the crop down not on her own horse but across the haunches of mine. The gelding screamed in pain and shock, lurching violently to the side. The world tilted. I fought for control, sawing at the reins, but the panicked animal bolted off the path, plunging into a thicket of snarled blackberry vines and young, slender trees. Low branches whipped at my face. Thorns tore at my clothes. I heard Lyra's laughter, sharp and fading, as she reined in and watched my chaos. My horse, blind with panic, slammed shoulder first into a mossy, half-rotted stump. The impact jarred me to my teeth. I was thrown from the saddle, sailing through the air for a heart-stopping moment before crashing down into a bed of damp ferns and decayed leaves. The wind was knocked from me. Pain bloomed in my side, my shoulder. I lay still, gasping, listening. My horse had vanished, crashing away into the woods. The sounds of the hunt were distant echoes. I was alone. This was her plan, not an arrow in the back too obvious, a riding accident, a tragic fall in the wild. She could even be the one to find my body, the picture of concerned grace. I pushed myself up, wincing. Nothing felt broken, but I was bruised, bleeding from a dozen scratches, and hopelessly lost. The dense canopy overhead turned the forest floor into a twilight gloom. I knew how to survive in woods, but these were royal hunting preserves, manicured and strange to me, and I was on foot. I started walking, trying to find a stream, a path, anything. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of moisture and the scuttle of unseen creatures. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Then I heard it, not a horse, a low, guttural growl that vibrated in the pit of my stomach. I froze. Slowly I turned. Eyes. Yellow, slitted eyes glowing in the dimness from behind a fallen log. A wolf, but not a shifted guard, not a citizen of the kingdom. This was a wild, rogue wolf, huge and gaunt, its fur matted. It was driven from its territory by the hunt, and now it had found easier prey, a lone, injured girl. It slunk into the clearing, lips peeled back from yellowed fangs. Saliva dripped from its jaws. It was starving, desperate. My knife was still at my belt. I drew it, the blade looking pitifully small. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I could not outrun it. I could not fight it and win. This was no longer Lyra's indirect plot. This was nature's brutal, immediate execution. The wolf gathered its haunches, muscles coiling like springs. It was going to leap. I braced, a scream trapped in my throat, ready to meet the end with steel in my hand. A whistle cut the air, sharp, commanding. The wolf flinched, its head snapping to the side. From the trees to my left, a figure emerged, not on horseback, on foot, moving with a silent, lethal grace, King Thuron. He held his longbow, but it was not drawn. In his other hand he held a short, heavy hunting spear. He did not look at me. His entire focus was on the wolf. He stepped between it and me, his posture radiating a dominance so absolute it was a physical force. He didn't growl, he didn't shift, he simply stood, a human king in a forest, and stared the beast down. "Leave," he said, his voice a low, resonant command that was neither shout nor whisper. It was pure alpha authority. The wolf whimpered. The yellow eyes flickered with confusion, then fear. It took a step back, then another. With a final, submissive tuck of its tail, it melted back into the shadows and was gone. The silence rushed back in, louder than before. Thuron turned to me. The mask was utterly shattered. His face was pale, his eyes blazing with an emotion I couldn't name. Fury, yes, but beneath it, something raw and terrified. He strode forward, his gaze sweeping over my torn clothes, the blood on my face. "Are you hurt?" The question was clipped, urgent. I'm all right," I managed, my voice shaking. "My horse, Lyra, I know what she did," he interrupted, his voice a growl. "I saw her circle back alone, I knew." He closed the distance, and for a dizzying moment I thought he might reach for me. He stopped himself, his hands clenching at his sides. "Can you walk?" I nodded, taking a step. A sharp pain lanced up my ankle. I stumbled. He was there in an instant, his arm catching me, supporting my weight. His touch was firm, warm, electric through the torn fabric of my sleeve. "You're not all right," he stated. "We need to get you back." "My brother," I gasped, the fear for Elian surging back. "Is safe," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "Varia has him. He never left the Citadel today. This was meant for you alone." He didn't let go of me. Instead, he whistled again, 2 sharp notes. Moments later, his massive black stallion emerged from the trees, calm and obedient. Thuron helped me mount, then swung up behind me, his body a solid wall at my back, his arms reaching around me to take the reins. We rode in silence back toward the sounds of the hunt. His proximity was overwhelming. I could feel the heat of him, the steady beat of his heart against my back, the controlled strength in the arms that caged me. It was not an embrace, it was a rescue, but it felt more intimate than any touch I had ever known. As we neared the edge of the woods, he spoke, his mouth close to my ear, his voice for me alone. "The tide, Eris, remember, it moves slowly." He paused, and his next words were a vow, cold and sharp as the spear in his hand. But today, Lyra Vance made a very grave error. She attacked a subject under the king's protection. In my forests, she will learn that even a king's strategic retreat has a limit. We broke from the tree line. The hunting party was gathered in a clearing, the stag finally taken. All eyes turned to us, the king riding double with the disheveled, bloody border girl. Lyra's perfect smile vanished, replaced by a stunned, ashen pallor. Thuron reined in his horse before the assembly. His voice when he spoke was the voice of the glacier, the voice of final judgment. "The hunt is ended, Lady Vance. You will attend me in the throne room at sunset. We have matters to discuss regarding forest etiquette." He didn't wait for her reply. He nudged the horse forward, carrying me away from the stunned silence back toward the Citadel. The public blow had been struck, not with evidence of grain theft but with the undeniable evidence of a royal rescue. The game had changed. The king had drawn a line. And I was on his side of it. Chapter 8, the line drawn in stone. The Citadel hummed with a new, dangerous energy. The image of the king returning with me, bloodied and supported before him, was a story told in 1,000 whispers before we even passed the gates. The official hunt was over, but the real hunt within the court had just begun. I was taken not to my room, but to the infirmary, a clean, bright space smelling of strong herbs. An elderly, no-nonsense healer named Marin cleaned my cuts, wrapped my sprained ankle, and gave me a pungent tea for the shock. She asked no questions. Her eyes, however, were kind. Captain Varia appeared as Marin finished. "Your brother is safe and unaware. He believes you took a minor fall during a riding lesson." She paused. "The king has requested you attend the evening court assembly. He believes it prudent for you to be seen." "Prudent," I echoed, the word feeling alien. "Alive, unbroken, standing," she clarified, her tone blunt. "It sends a message." So that evening I found myself at the edge of the grand hall, leaning on a provided cane, dressed in a simple, high-necked gray gown that was not my own. I was a living exhibit. The court's eyes were upon me again, but the disdain had been replaced by a feverish, calculating curiosity. "What is she? Why did the king himself intervene?" King Thuron sat upon the obsidian throne, a figure of remote, chilling authority. The business of the court preceded petitions from merchants, reports from garrison commanders, but a taut, electric anticipation thrummed beneath the formal words. Everyone was waiting. Finally, the herald's voice cut through the murmur. Lady Lyra Vance, mistress of the hunt, to attend the throne. A dead silence fell. Lyra walked into the hall, her posture erect, her face a perfect, pale mask of composed dignity. She curtsied deeply. "Your Majesty." Thuron did not ask her to rise, he let her hold the position, letting the silence stretch until it became a punishment in itself. The entire court leaned forward, breath held. "Lady Vance," the king began, his voice devoid of any emotion, cold and clear as a mountain stream. "The royal hunt is a tradition of skill, of camaraderie, of respect for the kingdom's bounty. Today, it appears, the tradition was misunderstood." Lyra lifted her head, her green eyes wide with practiced innocence. "Misunderstood, sire? I am afraid I do not, Thuron interrupted, the words a soft, deadly whip crack. "I witnessed your enthusiasm, riding perilously close to a less experienced member of the party, causing her mount to bolt into hazardous terrain." He leaned forward slightly, and the movement held the weight of a landslide. "Tell me, Lady Vance, in your role as mistress of the hunt, is it your duty to ensure the safety of all participants, or to create situations where their safety is compromised?" The color drained completely from Lyra's face. The court was so silent I could hear the sputter of the torches. He was not accusing her of attempted murder, he was accusing her of negligence, of failing her duty. It was a political masterstroke, a charge she could not deny without calling the king a liar, and one that carried severe public disgrace. I acted impulsively, Your Majesty," she stammered, the first crack in her flawless facade. "I intended only a playful rivalry. The terrain was unforeseen." "I am deeply distressed by Miss Thorne's accident." "Distressed," Thuron repeated, letting the word hang hollow and insincere in the air. "Your distress is noted. However, negligence in a position of responsibility cannot be overlooked. You are hereby relieved of your duties as mistress of the hunt. Furthermore, you will retire to your family's northern estates for a period of reflection." A full turning of the moon. A gasp rippled through the hall. Banishment, not permanent but a public exile, a humiliating demotion. It was a thunderclap. The Vance family, one of the oldest and most powerful, had just been slapped down in front of everyone. Lyra looked as if she'd been physically struck. Her eyes flashed toward me for a searing instant, filled with a hatred so pure it was a tangible heat. Then she bowed her head, her voice a choked whisper. As Your Majesty commands." "You are dismissed," Thuron said, turning his gaze away from her as if she were already gone. Lyra rose, her movement stiff, and walked from the hall. The sound of her retreating footsteps was the only noise in the vast space. The line had been drawn, not in sand but in stone for all to see. Cross the king's will, threaten those under his protection, and even a Vance would fall. The assembly continued, but the air was changed. The king had shown his teeth, and he had shown that the border girl was, inexplicably, under his guard. Afterward, as the courtiers streamed out in hushed, excited clusters, Captain Varia approached me again. "The king wishes a word." In the map room, this time the walk felt different. The courtiers I passed did not sneer or whisper behind their hands. They met my eyes, some with new wariness, some with dawning, speculative interest. I was no longer just a curiosity. I was a piece on the board that the king had moved decisively to protect. Thuron was in the map room, but he wasn't looking at charts. He stood by the high window, the fading twilight painting him in shades of blue and gray. He turned as I entered. "The ankle," was his first curt question. "Healer Marin says it will be fine in a few days." He nodded, then gestured to the table. A new, smaller map was spread there, marked with red ink. "Lyra's exile will create a vacuum. It will also enrage her brother and her allies. They will not strike at me directly, they will look for other pressure points." "Elian," I breathed. "Yes, and you." He pointed to the map. "Which is why you will not remain a passive target. You will become an active and very public asset." His finger tapped a location on the map, a village called Ironford, a day's ride into the borderlands. "A sickness has taken hold there, not plague but a sweating fever. The local healer is overwhelmed. The provisioning office, now under new, temporary management, has assembled medicine and supplies." He looked at me, his stormy eyes intent. "You will lead the relief convoy to Ironford." I stared at him, stunned. "Me? But I'm not a healer, I'm not a guard captain, I'm—" "You are a voice of the borders," he interrupted. "And now you will be seen as my hand reaching out to them. You will travel with a guard detail led by Captain Varia. You will oversee the distribution. You will listen to their grievances and report directly to me. It is a test, Eris, a test of your capability, a test of the court's reaction, and a shield. No accident can befall you on a publicly sanctioned royal mercy mission without pointing directly back to those who would benefit from your failure. The logic was flawless, daring. He was turning me from a liability into a symbol, and he was giving me a chance to do what I'd accused him of not doing: help my people. What if I fail? The question was a whisper. Then the Vance narrative wins. You are the unworthy upstart who bungled the king's goodwill. The fever spreads, people die, and the borderlands lose faith in the crown once more. He said it without sugarcoating, but you will not fail because you know what is at stake. And because you are not doing it for me, you are doing it for them. He was right. This was the tide moving, a slow, deliberate action to wash clean the neglect, and he was putting me at its forefront. When do we leave? At first light in 3 days' time. Use the time to study the manifests, the reports on the fever. Healer Marin will instruct you in the basics of the medicines. He paused, his gaze searching my face. This will be hard. You will be watched, criticized, and sabotaged at every turn. Are you prepared? I thought of Elian's face, of the hollow sacks in the granary, of the desperate eyes of the rogue wolf. I straightened my shoulders, ignoring the throb in my ankle. I am. A faint, almost imperceptible flicker of approval crossed his features. Good, Captain Varia will provide your instructions. He turned back to the window, a clear dismissal. As I reached the door, he spoke once more, his voice softer. Eris, I turned. The wolf in the forest, it was not part of Lyra's plan, that was merely the cruelty of the world. He met my eyes over his shoulder. But remember, the world is full of wolves, some run on 4 legs, some on 2, and some wear crowns. Be wary of all of them. I left the map room, my mind reeling, my heart a tumult of fear and a fierce, burning resolve. The king had drawn a line for the court, now he was drawing a path for me. A path out of the gilded cage and into the heart of the struggle. I was no longer just a witness. I was a weapon he had chosen to wield, and my first test awaited in a fever-stricken village called Ironford. Chapter 9, The Road to Ironford. The 3 days of preparation were a blur of controlled chaos. I spent hours with Healer Marin in the pungent sanctuary of the infirmary, learning to identify bundles of bitter-smelling leaves, vials of syrupy tonic, and cakes of dried fungus that were ground into powder. I memorized symptoms, the racking sweats, the burning skin, the delirium. I pored over the provisioning manifests until the numbers danced behind my eyes. So many sacks of flour, so many blankets, so many doses of febrifuge. Captain Varia was my constant, stern shadow. She drilled me on security protocols, on how to address village elders, on how to spot tampering with supplies. Assume everything is a threat, she said flatly. A loose wagon wheel, a sick guard, a gift of food from a smiling face. Trust your instincts. They are border instincts. They are sharp. The morning of departure arrived, cold and misty. The convoy assembled in the main bailey, 3 heavy-laden wagons, a dozen guards in the king's colors, and Captain Varia at their head. I wore practical traveling clothes and a thick wool cloak, the king's silver brooch, a simple, stark wolf's head, pinned at my shoulder, a visible mark of his authority, a target. Thuron did not come to see us off. His absence was a message in itself. This was not a royal procession but a functional mission. Yet as I mounted my horse, a sensible, calm mare this time, I saw a figure standing high on the battlements of the central tower. A tall, cloaked silhouette watching. He did not wave. He simply observed. It was enough. We passed through the gates, the iron portcullis rising like a beast's jaw to release us into the world. The mist clung to the Kingsroad, muffling sound, turning the familiar forest into a ghost world. The only noises were the creak of wagon wheels, the clop of hooves on stone, and the jangle of harness. The first day was tense but uneventful. We made camp at a fortified way station. Varia posted double guards. I checked the wagons, my fingers tracing the seals on the medicine chests, counting the sacks of grain. All was secure. On the second day, the sabotage began. It was subtle. The lead wagon developed a persistent wobble. When we stopped to investigate, the wheelwright found a crucial linchpin had been filed nearly through, meant to snap on a hard bump. It was not an accident, it was patience. The kind of patience that spoke of insider knowledge. Then at the noon meal, 2 of the guards fell violently ill, retching and clutching their stomachs. The water skins from the Citadel's kitchens were the culprit, tainted with a purgative herb, not poison but a delay, a thinning of our ranks. Varia's face was granite. She assigned the sick guards to ride in a wagon, tightened the circle, and her eyes scanned the tree line constantly. They are testing us, she muttered to me. testing our vigilance. The real strike will come when we are weary, when our attention slips. Her words were a cold stone in my gut. Who, the Vance family, from so far away? Allies or hired knives? The forest has ears and gold speaks all languages. She looked at me. This is the war you joined, Eris. It is fought with linchpins and poisoned water, not just swords. We pushed on, the atmosphere now a coiled spring. Every rustle in the underbrush was an ambush. Every traveler we passed on the road was a potential spy. My border instincts, long dulled by the citadel's stagnant air, came screaming back to life. I could smell the tension in the wind, see the too still places in the trees. Late on the second afternoon, we reached the turnoff from the King's Road, a narrow, muddy track leading up into the rocky hills toward Ironford. This was the most dangerous leg, isolated, perfect. We were halfway up a steep, wooded incline when the attack came. It was not a bandit raid. It was precise, military. Arrows hissed from the trees on the high side of the road, thudding into wagon canvas and dirt. Not aimed to kill, I realized with a chill. They were aimed at the horses. A shaft grazed the flank of the lead wagon's draft horse. The animal screamed, rearing in its traces, causing the heavy wagon to lurch and slide sideways in the mud, blocking the narrow road. Ambush, shields, Varya roared. The guards reacted with disciplined speed, forming a protective ring around the wagons, their shields locking into a wall. Figures, maybe 8 of them, clad in nondescript leathers and masks, descended from the slopes. They carried clubs and short axes, tools for breaking and smashing, not for pitched battle. Their goal was clear: destroy the wagons, ruin the mission, protect the supplies. I yelled, the order torn from me by pure instinct. I dismounted, drawing my knife, my heart a wild thing in my chest. This was not a forest wolf. This was human malice. A masked man charged my wagon, axe raised high to splinter the medicine chest. Without thinking, I lunged, not with my pitiful knife, but with a shovel that was lashed to the wagon's side. I swung it like a staff, catching him hard in the ribs. He grunted, stumbling, his axe blow going wild and biting deep into the wagon's wood. Varya was a whirlwind of steel, dropping one attacker with a brutal shield bash, disarming another. But there were too many. The guards were pinned, defending. Another attacker reached the second wagon and began hacking at the ropes holding the tarpaulin. Desperation gave me clarity, the king's brooch. I tore it from my cloak, holding it high. In the name of King Thuron, I shouted, my voice raw and carrying. You attack the king's mercy, your faces are seen, your lives are forfeit. It was a bluff, we didn't know their faces. But the authority in the name, the sheer audacity of the claim, made them hesitate for a critical second. That second was all Varya needed. She let out a sharp, ululating battle cry, the call of the king's guard. From further up the road, around the bend, an answering cry echoed. Hoofbeats thunderous, approaching fast. The masked raiders froze, looking at each other. This was not part of their plan. Reinforcements, they broke, melted back into the trees as swiftly as they had come, leaving their injured companion groaning on the ground. Moments later, a squad of 5 guards on horseback rounded the bend, led by a lieutenant I recognized from the citadel. Captain Varya, we heard the commotion from our patrol route. Varya, breathing hard, nodded her thanks. Her eyes met mine over the chaos. The unspoken truth passed between us: those patrols were not scheduled to be here. Thuron had sent an unseen tail, a second layer of protection. We secured the prisoner, tended to the wounded horse, and righted the wagon. The medicine chest was scarred but intact. The supplies were safe. As we prepared to move again, Varya pulled me aside. You used your head, not just your hands. The king's name is a weapon. You wielded it. It was the closest she would come to praise. The rest of the journey to Ironford was made in a grim, vigilant silence. The attempted sabotage had failed, but it had left its mark. We were not just delivering aid. We were invading hostile territory. Just before dusk on the 3rd day, we crested a final hill and saw Ironford in the valley below. My breath caught. It was not a village, it was a tomb. Smoke rose from only a few chimneys. No children played in the muddy lanes. The only movement was a slow, weary figure dragging a bucket from the central well. A heavy, sorrowful silence hung over the place, broken only by the occasional, heart-wrenching sound of coughing from within the squat stone houses. This was the truth. Not numbers on a ledger, not angry words in a letter. This was the suffering I had shouted about, and it was so much worse than I had imagined. We descended into the valley, the rumble of our wagons now feeling like an intrusion. Faces appeared at windows, gaunt and hopeless. Then a door opened and an old man, back-bent with more than age, stepped out. He was the elder. He looked at the wagons, at the king's guards, and finally at me. His eyes held no hope, only a deep, exhausted resignation. "Have you come," he asked, his voice a dry rasp, "to count the dead, or to help bury them?" The question hung in the cold air, a challenge and a plea. My mission had just begun, and the hardest part was not the journey nor the saboteurs. It was the despair in this old man's eyes and the terrible weight of the hope I now had to carry. Chapter 10. The heart of the sickness. The elder's name was Fen. His eyes, the color of river stones, held a lifetime of hardship and this new, unbearable grief. He led us to the village meeting hall, a cold, dirt-floored building that now served as a makeshift infirmary. The sight inside stole the air from my lungs. Pallets lined the walls, each holding a shivering, sweat-soaked body. The air was thick with the smell of sickness, of fever and despair. A weary woman, Marta, the local healer, moved among them, her movements slow with exhaustion. She looked up as we entered, and for a fleeting moment a spark of desperate hope lit her face before it was snuffed out by grim reality. "You brought guards," Fen said, his voice flat. "We need healers, medicine." "We have medicine," I said, forcing my voice to be steady. I gestured to the guards already unloading the wagons outside. "And we have hands to help. Captain Varia's guards will assist with the heavy work, the fetching and carrying." Varia gave a sharp nod, already directing her men to bring in the chests and supplies. The clinical efficiency of the guards was a stark contrast to the slow tragedy of the hall. I went to healer Marta. "Tell me everything." She did, in quick, practiced terms. The sweating fever had come with the first autumn rains. It started with chills, then burning skin, then delirium. The strong lasted a week, weakened but alive. The old, the young, the already weary, they died. "It moves through the blood, I think," she whispered. "But it's not like any ague I've seen, it's hungry." We set to work. I distributed the febrifuge powders, showed families how to mix them with clean water. We passed out blankets, bundled the shivering sick in wool. The guards brought in firewood, stoked the pitiful hearths in homes gone cold. The simple, physical act of doing something eased the crushing helplessness for a moment, but the distrust was a wall. Villagers accepted the supplies with silent nods, their eyes wary, following the king's silver brooch on my cloak. They saw the authority, not the aid. They saw the crown that had ignored them, now suddenly present. On the second day I found Fen staring at the swollen, fast-moving stream that gave Ironford its name. "The water is fouled," he said, not looking at me. "The fever started downstream of the old mine." A cold suspicion prickled at my neck. "What mine?" "Silver. Played out decades ago. The king's men sealed it, or said they did." He spat into the rushing water. "The spring rains were heavy this year, washed something out maybe. A man-made sickness, not an act of nature, but of neglect or worse." I thought of the filed linchpin, the tainted water skins. Sabotage was not just for convoys. "Show me," I said. He led me up a steep, overgrown path to a scar in the hillside, a boarded-up mine entrance, timbers rotten, the king's seal rusted and broken. A trickle of water, unnaturally milky and smelling of metal, seeped from a crack in the rock below the entrance, joining the stream. My borderer's knowledge was of plants and animals, not minerals, but I knew poison when I saw it leaching into a water source. I filled a small vial with the milky water, my hands trembling. When I returned, I found Captain Varia in a heated, low-voiced argument with one of her lieutenants by the wagons. "Not our mission," the lieutenant was insisting. "We deliver aid, we leave. Investigating old mines is a job for surveyors. If the source of the sickness is here, stopping it is the aid," Varia countered, her tone icy. She saw me approach and stopped. "Well," I showed her the vial, "the elder thinks this is the source. The mine was sealed by the crown, it's not sealed anymore." Varia took the vial, held it to the light, her face hardened. "This changes things." She looked at the lieutenant. "Ride back to the citadel. Now, hard and fast, deliver this to healer Marin and the king. Report what we found, request instructions and a mineral sage." The lieutenant looked rebellious for a heartbeat, then saluted and moved to his horse. The mission had just escalated. That night the fever took its worst turn yet. A young boy, maybe Elian's age, who had been stable, suddenly spasmed, his back arching off his palate. His skin, already hot, turned a frightening, blotchy red. Marta rushed to him, but her herbs did nothing. He fell into violent convulsions, and by the time they subsided, he was gone. His mother's wail tore through the hall, a sound of pure, shattered agony. In the terrible silence that followed, a man stood up from a nearby pallet. He was gaunt, eyes bright with fever and fury. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You," he croaked. You bring your king's guards and his trinkets, but you bring death with you. The fever was bad before, but now it steals our children in a day. What poison is in your medicine?" A murmur, ugly and fearful, rippled through the hall. The wall of distrust cracked and fear poured through, hot and dangerous. "The medicine is clean," I said, my voice rising above the murmur. "We are trying to help." "Help," the man spat. "The crown sealed that poisoned mine and forgot us. Now you come and death follows faster. You are a curse." The mood was turning, a beast awakening. I saw Varia's hand move subtly to her sword hilt, her guards tensed. This could shatter into violence in a breath. I did the only thing I could think of. I walked away from the safety of the guards toward the accusing man. I stopped an arm's length away, within reach of his rage. I unpinned the king's silver brooch from my cloak. I held it up so all could see. "This is the king's mark," I said, my voice ringing in the hushed hall. "It is a promise that you have not been forgotten, that your suffering is seen." I looked at the grieving mother, at Fenn's weary face, at the sick and the scared. "The brooch does not stop the fever. Medicine might, clean water will, and finding the truth of that mine, that will." I turned and pressed the brooch into Fenn's calloused hand. "The promise is not mine to wear, it is yours to hold, until the water runs clean. Until the fever breaks, we will stay until it is done." The hall was utterly silent. The angry man sank back to his pallet, his fury spent, replaced by confusion. Fenn looked down at the silver wolf in his palm, then at me. The resignation in his eyes flickered just for a second with something else, something like fragile, desperate trust. "You heard her," he said, his old voice gaining a shred of strength. "Stop wasting breath on blame. Fetch water from the clean spring up the ridge. Help them unload the rest of the grain." The tension broke, not into joy but into a weary, collective sigh. The immediate crisis had passed. Later, by the lone fire in the meeting hall, Varia approached me. That was a risk, giving away the king's token. It was a symbol. It needed to be here with them, not with me. She studied me for a long moment. "The king will be interested in your report." I knew what she meant. I had not just distributed aid. I had faced down a mob, made a public vow, and altered the mission on my own authority. I had either saved it or doomed it. As I tried to sleep on a hard bench, the vial of milky water sat nearby, a tiny vessel of terrifying truth. The sickness in Ironford was not just a misfortune, it was a legacy, a poisoned legacy bearing the king's broken seal, and I had just promised these people I would help uncover it. The king sought truth. Now I was dragging a piece of it, ugly and toxic, into the light. What would Thuron do when he learned his own kingdom's neglect was literally poisoning its people? And what would his enemies do with that knowledge? The mission was no longer about delivering supplies. It was about uncovering a secret, and secrets in the Silver Citadel were the most dangerous things of all. Chapter 11. The Sage and the Silence. The lieutenant returned from the Citadel on the fourth day, not with a single rider but at the head of a small, grim-faced contingent. With him rode a woman I had never seen, wrapped in a traveler's cloak of dusty gray, her hair streaked with iron and silver, her eyes the color of flint. Beside her, to my shock, was Silas Vance. My blood ran cold. The king's spymaster here. Was this Thuron's response, or had the Vance family inserted itself into the investigation? The lieutenant dismounted and handed Captain Varia a sealed scroll. "From the king," he said, his voice low. Varia broke the seal, her eyes scanning the contents. Her expression didn't change, but she gave a slight, sharp nod. She looked at the gray-clad woman. "Master Sage Kalen, you are welcome. The site is ready for your inspection." So this was the mineral sage. Kalen inclined her head, her gaze already sweeping over the village, the hills, absorbing everything with a scientist's detached curiosity. Then her eyes landed on me. They held no judgment, only a keen, probing intelligence. Silas Vance dismounted with smooth, unhurried grace. He smiled, a thin, practiced expression. "Miss Thorne." "Captain, the king is deeply concerned by your report. He has sent Master Kalen to ascertain the facts. I am here to facilitate communication with the local interests." His tone made it clear the local interests were people like Lord Barlow, who might own the mineral rights to long-dead mines. "The only interest here is clean water for sick people," I said, the words out before I could temper them. Silas's smile didn't waver. "Of course. And the crown's interest is in justice and stability. They are ideally the same thing." He turned to Kalen. "Master Sage, shall we?" We trekked to the mine, a somber procession, Kalen, Silas, Varia, 2 guards, and myself. The sage said nothing, her attention on the ground, the rocks, the vegetation. As we neared the seep, she held up a hand, stopping us. She approached alone, kneeling by the milky trickle. She took out tools, a magnifying lens, a small hammer, vials with droppers. She tasted a drop of the water on her finger and spat it out immediately, her face tightening. She chipped a piece of rock from near the seep, examined it, then bagged it. Her movements were swift, methodical. Finally, she stood, dusting her hands. She looked at Silas, then at me, her flinty eyes grave. The primary seal has failed. Water ingress has leached residual minerals from the tailings pile inside. Her voice was calm, academic. The milky color is suspended particulate, crushed rock, silicates. However, she paused, and the pause was heavy. My preliminary test indicates the presence of wolfsbane residue. The word dropped like a stone into a pond. Wolfsbane, not just a rock, a mineral toxic to our kind, used in tiny, controlled amounts by master healers for specific cures. In larger, uncontrolled doses, leaking into a water supply, it could cause fever, sweats, delirium, organ failure, a perfect, cruel mimicry of a natural sickness. Wolfsbane mining was banned by royal decree 30 years ago, Silas said smoothly, as if discussing the weather, after the Blackwater Valley incident. All known veins were sealed. This is not a known vein, Kalen stated. This is a silver mine. Wolfsbane is sometimes found in trace amounts adjacent to silver deposits. The original surveyors either missed it or omitted it from their report to expedite the silver extraction. The implication was monstrous. The mine had been sealed for spent silver, but a poison had been left behind, unrecorded, a ticking poison in the earth, and now it was waking up. Can it be stopped? I asked, my voice hollow. Kalen nodded. A proper seal, deep grouting, diversion of the spring. It is technical, costly, but possible. The immediate solution is to reroute the village's water intake to the Clean Ridge Spring permanently. Then we will begin that work at once, Varia said. A prudent course, Silas agreed, his tone agreeable, but his eyes were chips of ice. Master Kalen will draft her full report for the king. The crown will, of course, bear the cost of the remediation, a tragedy of past oversight now corrected. He made it sound so clean. An oversight, a past mistake. It whitewashed the greed, the neglect, the dead child. I felt sick. We returned to the village. Kalen set to work drafting plans for the water diversion with Fen. Silas retired to the small room he had commandeered, speaking in low tones with the lieutenant. Writing dispatches. That night a deep, moonless blackness settled over Ironford, the kind of dark that feels like a blanket smothering sound and sight. I was taking a final walk around the perimeter, unable to sleep, when I saw it, a flicker of movement near the sealed mine path, not from the village but from the woods beyond. Not an animal. The shape was wrong. A human silhouette carrying something. My heart slammed against my ribs. I slipped into the shadows, my borderer's feet silent on the damp earth. I followed, keeping distance, my senses straining. The figure reached the old mine entrance. He set down his burden, a small keg. He worked quickly, prying at the rotten timbers with a crowbar, making the existing crack wider. He was going to dump the contents of the keg into the seep, to worsen the leak, to contaminate the evidence before Kalen's final report. I didn't think, I acted. I stepped out of the trees. Stop, the figure whirled. In the faint starlight I saw the lieutenant's face, twisted in panic and determination. You shouldn't be here. What are you doing? I demanded, stepping closer. Is that more poison? It's a solution. He hissed, desperation in his voice. To make the problem clear, to force the king's hand to abandon this worthless village for good. They're a drain on resources. This is for the kingdom's strength. He wasn't working for the Vances. He was a fanatic. A loyalist so twisted he thought poisoning his own people was a patriotic act. He lunged for the keg, intent on finishing his horrible task. I threw myself at him, not to fight but to knock the keg away. We grappled in the dark, slipping on wet rock. He was stronger, driven by a mad purpose. He shoved me hard. I fell, my head cracking against a stone. Dazzling lights exploded in my vision. Through the ringing in my ears, I saw him raise the crowbar, his eyes wild. You're the problem, you and your soft heart. The border needs a strong hand, not pity. The crowbar descended. A crossbow bolt sprouted from his shoulder. He screamed, stumbling back, the crowbar clattering to the ground. From the darkness, Silas Vance emerged, lowering a small, elegant crossbow. His face was a calm, deadly mask. Lieutenant Gorvin, Silas said, his voice like silk over a razor, conspiring to poison a royal water source, a capital offense. Lord Vance, I was acting for the good of the realm, to prevent weak sentiment from... You were acting on your own misguided zeal, Silas interrupted, his voice cutting. a sad end to a promising career. He gestured, and two of his own men, shadows I hadn't seen, materialized and seized the weeping lieutenant. Silas turned his gaze to me where I still sat on the ground, clutching my throbbing head. "Miss Thorne, your vigilance is commendable and inconvenient." He offered a hand to help me up. I ignored it, pushing myself to my feet. "You were watching him," I accused, my voice shaky. "I watch everyone," Silas replied evenly. "It is my function. He has been voicing concerning opinions for some time. I suspected he might attempt something foolish to prove his point during this sensitive mission." He glanced at the keg. "A tragic, solitary madman, the report will be clear. He was crafting the narrative already, a lone fanatic, not systemic failure, not noble corruption, a clean, simple story that buried the deeper, uglier truths. And the mine, the original survey," I pressed, "a regrettable historical error. The king will make amends." He looked at me, his green eyes unreadable in the dark. "Some truths, Miss Thorne, are like this wolfsbane, useful in tiny, controlled doses, lethal when they flood the system. The king understands this. I suggest you learn it as well." He turned and walked away, his men dragging the sobbing lieutenant behind him. I stood alone in the dark by the poisoned seep, the taste of metal and deceit thick in my mouth. I had uncovered a truth. And the king's spymaster had just shown me how it would be packaged, sanitized, and buried. The sickness had a source. The sabotage had a perpetrator, but the real disease, the one that allowed it all to happen, was still unnamed, still protected. I had promised Fen I would see it through, but what was I bringing them? A clean water source, yes, but also a lie, a convenient lie that let the powerful sleep soundly. The tide of justice Thuron spoke of, was it just a gentle, forgiving wave that washed over the facts, leaving them blurred and acceptable? I walked back to the village, my head aching, my heart heavier than it had ever been. The brooch I had given Fen felt like a lead weight in my conscience. What was the king's promise truly worth? Chapter 12, The Throne Room's Truth. The return to the Silver Citadel was a funeral procession without a body. The Lieutenant Gorvin was kept heavily sedated and bound, a secret shame in our midst. Master Sage Kaelin rode in contemplative silence, her full report sealed in a leather case. Silas Vance was a polite, watchful ghost at the edge of our company. I felt hollowed out. The image of the young boy convulsing, Fen's weary eyes, the milky poison seeping from the king's broken seal, it all played behind my eyes, a silent, screaming reel. And over it, Silas's calm voice, "Some truths are lethal when they flood the system." We were ushered into the citadel through a private gate, avoiding the main courtyards. There were no greetings. Captain Varia was summoned immediately to the King's Guard headquarters. I was taken to my old room in the west wing. The lock did not turn behind me this time. I was free to roam, but the gilded cage now felt of my own making. The summons came within the hour, not to the map room, not to a windy belfry, to the throne room. My heart was a cold, hard lump in my chest. I washed my face, changed into the simple gray dress, and walked the familiar, echoing corridors. The courtiers I passed averted their eyes. News in some form had already spread. The air smelled of anticipation and fear. The double doors of the throne room swung open. The vast space was not full, but it was not empty. A select assembly, the grim-faced members of the king's inner council, Lord Barlow among them, looking tense. Captain Varia stood at rigid attention near the dais. Silas Vance stood to the king's right, a dark, attentive statue. And in the center of the polished floor, Master Sage Kaelin waited, her case at her feet. King Thuron sat upon the obsidian throne. He was the full, terrifying embodiment of royalty. Crowned, cloaked, his expression carved from the same stone as his seat. The man from the garden from the belfry was utterly gone. This was the sovereign. I approached and bowed, my movement stiff. "Rise, Heiress Thorne," Thuron's voice echoed, cool and formal. "Master Sage Kaelin has presented her findings. Captain Varia has delivered her report. We have heard the account of the apprehended culprit. Now we will hear yours. Speak plainly of what you witnessed in Ironford." All eyes were on me. Lord Barlow's gaze was a physical pressure, hostile and wary. Silas watched with detached interest. Kaelin gave a slight, encouraging nod. I spoke of the despair, the stench of sickness, the healer's exhaustion. I described the milky seep, Fen's suspicion, my own growing dread. I told them of the child's death, of the father's accusation, of giving away the brooch to hold their fragile trust. My voice grew stronger, fueled by the memory of their pain. Then I reached the mine. I described Kaelin's diagnosis, wolfsbane, the banned mineral, the failed seal. I did not say historical error. I said, the original survey either missed or omitted a lethal poison to expedite silver extraction. A ripple went through the council. Lord Barlow's face flushed. I continued, my gaze locking on Thuron's impassive face. The immediate threat was being addressed, the water was being rerouted, but the deeper sickness remained. And then the lieutenant, I recounted the moonless night, the keg, his fanatical rant about strength over pity, the crowbar, Silas's timely intervention. He called it a solution, to make the problem so clear the village would be abandoned. When I finished, the silence was absolute, heavy as a burial shroud. Thuron steepled his fingers. A tragic sequence, he intoned. A village suffering from a legacy of unfortunate oversight, a lone, misguided soldier attempting to compound the tragedy, and your actions, Miss Thorne, which preserved life and evidence. He looked to Kaelin, the remediation, the cost. Kaelin stepped forward. The engineering is straightforward, Your Majesty. The cost is significant, but within the Royal Treasury's capacity for public works. The water diversion is already underway. See that it is completed without delay, Thuron said. Funds will be allocated. He turned to Lord Barlow. Lord Barlow, the mining charter for that sector was under your family's purview a generation ago. Your thoughts on this omission? Barlow stepped forward, sweating but composed. A grievous failure of the surveyors, Your Majesty. A failure of technology of the time. My father, may he rest, spoke often of the challenges of those early digs. He would be heartbroken to know of this suffering. The Barlow House pledges a generous donation to the remediation fund and to the families of Ironford. He bowed deeply, performing contrition perfectly. It was a transaction, gold for gilt, neat and clean. Thuron nodded, a suitable gesture. His gaze swept the room. The rogue lieutenant will face a military tribunal and swift justice. The people of Ironford will have their clean water. The past error will be corrected. This matter is concluded. Concluded, the word was a door slamming shut. I couldn't stop myself. A sound escaped me, a sharp, disbelieving breath. Thuron's stormy eyes snapped to mine. You have something to add, Miss Thorne. All the frustration, the grief, the sense of monstrous injustice boiled over. Concluded, my voice trembled, but it carried. A child is dead, a village was poisoned by greed given a royal seal, a soldier thought poisoning his own people was loyal. And the conclusion is a donation and a single execution. The council gasped, Silas's eyebrow twitched infinitesimally, Varia stared straight ahead, her jaw a rock. Thuron's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room dropped to freezing. What would you have, Heiress Thorne? A purge of families for the mistakes of their fathers, a public inquest that shatters confidence in the crown and gives our enemies a weapon. The lieutenant's fate is sealed, the village is being saved, the balance is restored. The balance, the word was ash in my mouth. You told me justice was a tide. This isn't a tide, this is sweeping the muck under the throne. A deadly silence followed. I had gone too far, I had spoken the unspeakable in the very heart of power. Thuron stood, he did not shout. He did not rage, his quiet voice was more terrifying than any roar. You speak of muck, I rule a kingdom perched on a mountain of it. Every day I choose which layers to dig out and which must be left to stabilize the ground. You see one village. I see a map ready to tear at its seams. Your truth is a blade, a necessary blade, but you do not yet understand when to cut and when to sheath it. He descended the dais steps, stopping before me. He was so close I could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the faint lines of exhaustion no crown could hide. You asked for justice for the borders, you have it. Clean water, medicine, a future. Is it pure? No. Is it real? Yes. Will you take it and continue the longer fight, or will you let the perfect be the enemy of the good and leave them with nothing but your righteous anger? He was offering me a choice here in front of everyone. Accept the messy, compromised victory. Stay in the game or walk away morally clean and utterly ineffective. I thought of Fen holding the brooch, of the clean ridge spring being channeled to Ironford. It was not nothing, it was a lifeline. I looked into the eyes of the tyrant king who moved in shadows and compromises, who carried the weight of a kingdom's sins so it wouldn't collapse. I saw no malice there, only a terrible, weary resolve. My defiance shattered not into submission but into a painful, adult understanding. The war wasn't won in one glorious battle, it was won in 1,000 grim, partial victories. I lowered my eyes, the fight draining out of me. I will take the water for Ironford, I whispered. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh seemed to go through him. Wise. He turned back to the throne. This council is adjourned. As the lords filed out murmuring, Silas Vance paused beside me. His voice was a soft, private poison. A valuable lesson, Miss Thorne. The throne room is where truths come to be trimmed to fit, remember it. He glided away. I stood alone in the vast, emptying hall. Captain Varia approached. Come, she said, her voice not unkind. You need to rest. I followed her out, feeling as if I had aged a decade. I had gone to the border seeking truth and justice. I had brought back a compromised salvation and a soul-deep disillusionment. King Thuron had won. He had stabilized his ground, but as I walked back to my room I couldn't shake the question, what was buried under that stability, and how long before it poisoned everything from below. The game continued, but I was no longer a wide-eyed pawn. I was a battle-scarred soldier who had just seen the true cost of the king's peace, and I wasn't sure if I could ever pay it again. Chapter 13, An Offer from the Shadows. The days following the throne room were a strange, suspended silence. I was not punished, I was not celebrated, I was accommodated. My presence in the citadel was now an accepted, if uncomfortable, fact. I took meals in my room or in small, quiet corners of the hall. I walked the inner gardens, but the memory of my first encounter with Thuron there was now tainted by the bitter aftertaste of compromise. I saw Elian once from a distance. He was training in the main yard with a unit of younger recruits, his movements earnest and sharp under Captain Varia's watchful eye. He looked focused, alive. The sight was a balm and a fresh wound. He was safe, thriving in the world that had just shown me its rotten foundations. I did not approach. My shadow felt too dark to cast upon his new light. I was adrift. The fiery purpose that had driven me to speak truth to power had burned down to cold ashes. What was I now? The king's inconvenient conscience, a living reminder of a truth he had chosen to bury. It was in this state of hollowed-out limbo that the unexpected offer came. I was in the citadel's vast, silent library, a place of dust and whispered knowledge, seeking nothing but solitude among the towering shelves. I was tracing the spine of a history of the border wars when a smooth, familiar voice spoke from the aisle behind me. Finding solace in the past, Miss Thorne, a common refuge for those disillusioned with the present. I turned. Silas Vance stood there, dressed in unrelenting black, a single, ancient-looking book in his hand. He looked like a scholar, but his eyes were a spymaster's, observant, calculating, devoid of warmth. Lord Vance, I said, my voice flat, I seek only quiet. Of course, the quiet after the storm, a time for reflection. He slid the book he held back onto a shelf with precise care. Your performance in the throne room was illuminating. You have a passionate heart. And a mind that seeks linear justice in a circular world. Is there a point to this analysis? I asked, weariness making me bold. A point, an observation, and an offer. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial murmur that seemed to absorb the very dust in the air. The king values you as a blunt instrument, a hammer to point out cracks in the wall, but a hammer cannot fix a crack. It can only make it bigger or be set aside when more delicate tools are required. His words found the raw, aching heart of my confusion. What are you suggesting? That there are other ways to serve the kingdom, ways that are not so publicly bruising. The world the king manages is one of visible power, thrones, decrees, armies. He paused, his gaze intense. But there is another world, Miss Thorne, a world of whispers, of secrets that travel in the dark. Of problems solved before they ever reach a throne room to become messy, public compromises. My blood ran cold. The world you inhabit, a necessary world, he affirmed, his tone utterly reasonable. The king's left hand while his right holds the scepter. We secure the stability he needs to rule. Sometimes that means quietly removing a fanatical lieutenant before he acts. Sometimes it means ensuring an inconvenient truth from a mind's survey loses its sharpest edges. So he admitted it. He had shaped the narrative, softened the crime. You want me to join you, to become a whisper in the dark? Disgust coded the words. I want you to consider where your talents can be most effective, he corrected, unruffled. You are brave, you are observant, you move through shadows without being seen. I witnessed that in Ironford. You have a connection to the borderlands, a place rife with secrets that never make it to the Kingsroad. The king sees you as a voice for the people. I see you as eyes and ears among them. You could do real, tangible good. Prevent tragedies before they require a king's messy, half-measured justice. The offer was insidious. It made a terrible kind of sense. From within Silas's web, could I have stopped the mine poison before it ever leaked? Could I have uncovered the granary theft before a village starved? It was action, not just angry words. It was a path to power, real, shadowy power to protect people like Elian, like Fen. but the cost, you ask me to trade my voice for silence, I whispered, to hide the truth instead of speaking it. I ask you to understand that truth is a weapon, he said, his voice like a razor's edge. And a weapon is most effective when it is not brandished in the square, but placed silently at the throat of the problem in a dark alley. He took a final step, and his presence was overwhelming, a chilling void. The king offered you a place at his side in the light. I am offering you a place in the engine room where the real work of keeping the ship afloat is done. Think on it. Passion is a flame. It can light a way or it can burn down everything you hope to save. Learn to control the fire, Eris. He gave a slight, mocking bow and melted back into the stacks, disappearing as soundlessly as he had arrived. I stood frozen, the weight of his offer pressing down on me. It was a fork in the path I had never seen coming. Thuron's way, public, compromised, but honest in its dishonesty. Silas's way, secret, effective, and morally corrupt. Neither was the path of the girl who wrote the angry letter. That girl was gone, buried under the cold realities of power. I left the library, my mind a riot. I walked without seeing, ending up not at my room but at the door to the map room. It was unlocked. I pushed it open. Thuron was there. He stood at the central table, but he wasn't studying charts. He was staring at nothing, one hand braced on the wood, his head bowed. In the solitary, dusty light, he looked less like a king and more like a man carrying a mountain on his back. He looked alone. He heard me enter and straightened, the mask of command settling over his features in an instant. But I had seen the man beneath for just a second. Eris, his voice was rough. You seek something? The words tumbled out, raw and unguarded. Silas Vance approached me in the library. He offered me a place in his world. Thuron went very still. The air in the room grew taut. Did he? It wasn't a question, it was a quiet, dangerous acknowledgement. He said you see me as a hammer, he sees me as a quieter tool. And what do you see? The question was low, intent. I see, I struggled, the confusion and betrayal swirling. I see that the justice you gave Ironford feels like a lie, and the power Silas offers feels like a deeper lie. I don't know what path is left. Thuron was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. Silas is not wrong, the world he describes exists, and it is necessary, but it is a poison in itself, a necessary poison administered in careful doses by a steady hand. He looked at me, his stormy eyes bleak. My hand. He serves at my pleasure. His world exists to protect the one where hammers can sometimes, against all odds, be swung. He came around the table, stopping a few feet away. He wants you because you are untainted. Because you have a compass he and his agents have long since lost. He wants to use that compass for his own ends, to make his poison more palatable. He took a step closer, his gaze piercing. Do not mistake his offer for a promotion, Eris. It is an assimilation. He would take the fire that makes you see the cracks and teach you to plaster over them instead. Then what is my place? The plea in my voice was unmistakable. If I am not a silent tool and I am too blunt to be a wise one, what am I? A faint, weary, and utterly genuine smile touched his lips. It was the most human expression I had ever seen from him. You are the thorn, Eris Thorn. Embedded in the paw of the beast, a constant, irritating, painful reminder that it cannot run without feeling the prick, that it must sometimes stop and tend to the wound. The smile faded. It is not a comfortable role, it is not a safe one. The beast may one day bite the thorn out, but while it is there, it keeps the beast from forgetting it has paws at all. The metaphor was shocking, brutal, and perfectly true. I was his conscience, his living, breathing, inconvenient prick of shame and reminder. And you would have me stay as a thorn? I would have you choose, he said, his voice softening. But know this, the throne room, that was the king speaking. This here now, this is the man telling you that I need the thorn. This kingdom needs the thorn. Even if it pains us both. He turned away, looking out the high window. Silas's offer is a path of power and shadows and a slow death of the spirit. My path is one of perpetual conflict, of public failure, and of small, hard-won victories that may never feel like enough. He glanced back. Choose, but choose knowing the true cost of each. He left me then, alone in the map room with the ghosts of kingdoms and the weight of an impossible choice. Silas offered effective, hidden power. Thuron offered a lifetime of painful, visible struggle. Neither was the justice I dreamed of. Both were the reality of the world I lived in. I stood there as the light faded, the map of the kingdom a blur before my eyes. I was not a girl with a letter anymore. I was a woman at a crossroads, and every path led away from the person I once was. The choice was mine, and it would define not just my future but what was left of my soul. Chapter 14, The Thorn's Choice. I did not sleep. I paced my room as the citadel slumbered, Silas's cool, logical offer and Thuron's weary, painful truth warring in my mind. One promised efficacy cloaked in shadow, the other promised a lifetime of bruising, compromised light. At dawn, I knew my answer. It was not born of sudden courage but of a deep, stubborn refusal, a refusal to let the girl who climbed trees and loved her brother be erased by a spymaster's calculus, a refusal to let the king's difficult, stained path be the only one walked. I would be the thorn, but I would not be a passive one simply causing pain. I would be a catalyst. I sought out Captain Varia as she inspected the morning guard rotation in the main yard. I need to see the granary ledgers again, I said without preamble. Not the ones from the central store, the regional requisition orders for the last 5 years for the entire eastern border. Varia eyed me, her expression unreadable. That is a mountain of parchment. To what end? The granary theft wasn't an isolated event. Ironford wasn't an isolated tragedy. They are symptoms. If I am to be a thorn, I will not just prick the paw, I will find the infection. My voice was steady, my resolve a cold, clear flame. The king wants my eyes, he will have them. But he will get the full report, not the trimmed version. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps crossed her stern face. The archives are in the West Tower. They are a mess. I will get you access. The West Tower archives were indeed a catacomb of neglect. Dust lay thick on endless shelves of scrolls and bound ledgers. It smelled of mildew and forgotten time. I was given a small, cold chamber to work in, a mountain of documents, and a silent, watchful guard at the door. For days, I lived in that dust. I cross-referenced grain shipment manifests from Stonewatch with tax collection records from the same period. I traced the flow of silver from minor mines to royal coffers. My eyes burned, my fingers were stained with ink and grime. Patterns began to emerge, faint at first, then glaring. The theft was not just Milo Barlow, it was a system, a network. Shortfalls in one district were covered by inflated yields in another, all on paper. Silver that should have gone to repair roads and fortify border outposts vanished into a maze of intermediary accounts with names I didn't recognize. The historical error of the Ironford mine was not unique. I found 2 other sealed mines on the border with similar notations of secondary mineral deposits negligible. Were they negligible or conveniently ignored? I was assembling a map of rot, and it led in directions that made my hands tremble. The tendrils touched not just the Barlow family, but merchants who supplied the Citadel garrison commanders who filed false troop strength reports to pocket supply allowances, and yes, even names loosely affiliated with the Vance trading interests. I was no spymaster. I was just a stubborn woman with a head for numbers and a heart full of rage, but the picture I was piecing together was more dangerous than any angry letter. On the 5th day, I found it. A single, seemingly innocuous entry in a logistics ledger for the Royal Guard, seasonal reprovisioning, Northwatch Garrison. The amount of lamp oil was enough to light a small town for a year. Northwatch was a tiny, remote outpost of 20 men. It was a thread. A stupid, greedy, obvious thread. I pulled it. I tracked the order to the merchant house that fulfilled it, Silverflow Mercantile. I traced Silverflow's other contracts. They supplied the Citadel's stables, the kitchens, the barracks. And one of their silent partners, buried in a subsidiary charter, was a name that stopped my heart. Vorlon, Elian's sword master, the man personally overseeing his training unit. The corruption wasn't just stealing grain and silver, it was here, inside the guard itself, buying influence. Placing loyal, compromised men near promising recruits like my brother. This was no longer about the past. This was a live wire snaking toward Elian's future. I had to act. But going to Thuron with this half-formed, explosive map would trigger the same response. Containment, compromise, a quiet reassignment for Vorlon, a stern warning to Silverflow. The infection would retreat, not be cured. I needed undeniable public proof. I needed to force the king's hand, to make the corruption so blatant he could not bury it. I needed to be more than a thorn, I needed to be a surgeon's lance. My opportunity came from an unexpected source, Elian himself. He managed to slip a note to me, delivered by a kitchen boy he'd befriended. Eris, Swordmaster Vorlon is taking our unit on a field exercise tomorrow, to the old Silverflow storehouses by the river docks. Says it's about securing supply lines. It feels strange, the others are excited. I am not the Silverflow storehouses, the heart of the parasite, this was it. A field exercise was the perfect cover for moving illicit goods or for inducting young, impressionable guards into the network. And Elian would be there, I couldn't go to Varia. Her loyalty was to the king and the chain of command. She would take it to Thuron and the operation would be quietly scrubbed, the evidence hidden. I had to go alone, I had to see. I had to catch them in the act and create a spectacle so public the king would have no choice but to let the truth flood the system. It was reckless, it was suicidal, it was the only path left that felt true. That night I prepared. I took a dark cloak, a small, sharp dagger. I wrote 2 letters, one to Elian telling him to feign enthusiasm but stay alert, to stick close to Captain Varia's most trusted men if he could. I had no way to send it. The second letter I sealed with candle wax. It bore a single word on the outside, Thuron. Inside I wrote only 3 lines, the infection is in the guard's heart. Silverflow storehouses, river docks at dawn, come with witnesses or the rot wins. I did not sign it. I slipped the letter under the door of the map room in the deepest hour of the night. Then I became a shadow. I left the citadel not by the gates, but by the same postern door the kitchen staff used, melting into the pre-dawn gloom of the city below the fortress. I moved through the winding, stinking streets toward the river, my heart a frantic drum, my breath pluming in the cold air. The river docks were a world of their own, a maze of sagging warehouses and rusted cranes. The Silverflow storehouse was a large, nondescript building at the end of a deserted pier. As the first gray light bled into the sky, I saw them, a unit of young guards, Elian among them, standing at uneasy attention. Before them stood Swordmaster Vorlin and with him 2 men in rich merchants' robes. They were not inspecting crates of lamp oil. They were loading small, heavy-looking chests from the storehouse onto a nondescript barge. One of the chests slipped from a guard's nervous grip. It cracked open on the dock, spilling not tools or provisions but raw, glittering silver ore, the exact silver that had vanished from the border mine reports. Vorlin cursed, smacking the young guard. "Fool, that is royal property." "Is it?" A clear, cold voice rang out. I stepped from the shadows of a neighboring shed, pulling back my hood. All eyes turned to me. Elian's face went pale with shock and fear. Vorlin recovered quickly, his face twisting into a sneer. "The border wench, lost again. This is a restricted training area. Training in smuggling." I shot back, walking forward, my gaze on the spilled silver. "Training in theft from the crown. I have seen the ledgers, Vorlin, the inflated oil, the missing silver, and I see it now here with my brother and his unit as your unwitting pack mules." The merchant beside Vorlin stepped forward, his face smug. "You see nothing, girl. This is a license transfer. You are trespassing. Guards, arrest her for interfering with royal business." The young guards looked confused, miserable. Elian took a step toward me, but Vorlin's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder, holding him fast. "Don't," Vorlin hissed to Elian, then glared at me. "You have just signed your death warrant with your mouth. The river is deep. Accidents happen." He nodded to 2 of his loyal, older guards. They advanced on me, swords drawn. This was it, the moment of truth. I had gambled everything on the king. Had he gotten my note, would he come? Or was I just another inconvenient problem about to be swept into the dark water? I stood my ground, the dagger in my hand feeling like a toy. "The king knows," I lied, my voice ringing with a certainty I didn't feel. "He is on his way." Vorlin laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "The king is asleep in his tower. He doesn't patrol docks." The guards were almost upon me. I braced myself, ready to fight, to scream, to do anything. Then from the far end of the pier came the sound of hoofbeats. Not the clatter of a few horses, the thunder of many. We all turned. Emerging from the dawn mist was a phalanx of the king's guard, led by Captain Varia on her warhorse. And beside her, mounted on his massive black stallion, wearing not robes but battle leathers, his face a mask of frozen fury, was King Thuron. He had come, and he had brought an army. Vorlin's face went from triumph to sheer, abject terror. The merchant scrambled for the barge, but royal guards were already surrounding the dock. Thuron rode forward, his gaze sweeping over the scene, the chest of spilled silver, the terrified young recruits, Vorlin's hand on Elian, the 2 guards closing in on me. His eyes, when they met mine, held no warmth, only a storm of terrifying, kingly wrath. "Swordmaster Vorlin," Thuron's voice cut the morning air like a blade, "explain this field exercise." The game was over, the thorn had drawn blood. And now the beast had arrived to see what its pain had revealed. Chapter 15. The unflinching dawn. The silence on the dock was absolute, broken only by the lap of dirty water against the pilings and the restless shift of the king's stallion. The rising sun painted the scene in harsh, unforgiving light, exposing every grain of spilled silver, every guilty flinch. King Thuron dismounted. The sound of his boots on the wet wood was a final, judging drumbeat. He did not look at me. His entire being was focused on Vorlon, who had released Elian and now stood trembling, his arrogance evaporated. Well, Thuron's single word was soft, deadly. Your Majesty, Vorlon stammered, falling to one knee. A misunderstanding, a training exercise in logistics. This ore is from a decommissioned mine, slated for royal assay. Silence. Thuron did not raise his voice. The command was a whip crack. He walked to the split chest, knelt, and picked up a lump of the raw, gleaming ore. He turned it in his hand, then looked at the merchant, who was now on his knees, weeping. Silverflow, you have a license to ship lamp oil and hardtack, not unminted royal ore. He stood, his gaze sweeping over the terrified young guards. These children were your couriers. He turned his stormy eyes back to Vorlon. You used my guard, you used boys sworn to protect this kingdom, to steal from it, you poisoned the well at its source. Thuron's composure was more terrifying than any rage, it was the calm of an executioner. He gestured to Captain Varia. Arrest them, all of them, the merchants, their clerks, every guard in Vorlon's unit above the rank of recruit. They will be held in the black cells. Varia moved with lethal efficiency, her guards swarming forward. Cries and pleas filled the air, but they were swiftly muted. Then Thuron turned to me. His eyes were like chips of glacial ice. And you, he took a step closer. You played a reckless, stupid, breathtakingly brave game. You laid a trap with your own life as the bait. I gave you the truth, I said, my voice trembling only slightly. The whole truth, not a trimmed version. You told me to choose. I chose to show you the infection, not just tell you it ached. For a long, agonizing moment, he just stared at me. The world hung in the balance. Would he see the defiance or the loyalty, the recklessness or the necessity? A muscle ticked in his jaw. He gave a single, sharp nod. So you did. He looked past me to Elian, who stood pale and shaking but upright. Recruit Thorn, you showed discernment. You questioned a wrong order. That is the first duty of a true guardsman. You will be reassigned to Captain Varia's personal detail today. Elian's eyes widened. He saluted fist to chest, his young face a mix of shock and dawning pride. Thank you, Your Majesty. Thuron then addressed the remaining, horrified young recruits. You have witnessed a betrayal of the highest order. You will be questioned, but you are not accused. Let this be your first and most important lesson. The enemy is not always beyond the wall. Sometimes he wears the same uniform. Dismissed. The recruits stumbled away, shepherded by Varia's guards, their world shattered and rebuilt in the span of minutes. Finally, Thuron looked at the growing crowd of dockworkers and early merchants gathering at the head of the pier, drawn by the royal presence. He raised his voice, letting it carry over the water. Let it be known, the corruption ends today. Not with whispers and compromises, but with light and steel. The thieves who prey on this kingdom from within will find no shelter, not in my guard, not in my courts, not in the shadows. He pointed to the arrested men. These men will face a public tribunal. Their crimes will be read aloud, their connections will be unearthed no matter how high they reach. It was a declaration of war, on his own court, on the system of quiet corruption. He was using the scandal I had forced into the open as a torch to burn out the rot. He turned, his cloak swirling, and mounted his horse. He looked down at me where I still stood amid the evidence. Eris Thorn, you will return to the citadel. You will testify before the tribunal. You will present every ledger, every figure you have found. His gaze was unflinching. You wanted justice to be a tide? Very well, you have opened the floodgates. Now you will help me steer the deluge so it washes away the filth and not the innocent. It was not forgiveness, it was a mobilization. He was conscripting me into his war, publicly and completely. The ride back to the citadel was a somber procession of prisoners and power. News flew ahead of us. By the time we passed through the gates, the citadel was buzzing like a kicked hive. Nobles clustered in doorways, their faces pale with fear or tight with calculation. The Vance faction was notably absent. I was taken not to my room but to a secure chamber adjacent to the guard headquarters, a place for witnesses. Food and water were brought. Healer Marin checked me over, clucking at my exhaustion. I was a tool again, but this time, a tool being carefully prepared for a precise public function. 2 days later, the tribunal began. It was held in the Grand Hall, but it was not a courtly affair. It was stark, brutal. The spilled silver ore sat on a table as evidence. I was called to testify first. I stood before the assembled judges, elders, military commanders, and Thuron himself presiding. I did not speak of anger or letters or thorns. I spoke numbers, dates, shipment IDs. I showed the chain from missing border silver to the silver flow ledgers to the inflated provisioning orders. I named names I had found, my voice clear and steady. I pointed to Vorlin, to the weeping merchants, and said, "This is where the trail leads." It was cold, factual, and devastating. There were no outbursts from the accused. The evidence was too plain, too voluminous. The king's icy rage had set the tone. This was not a debate but an autopsy. Over the next week, the unraveling was swift and merciless. Lord Barlow was publicly censured and stripped of his seat on the council for gross oversight. His family's donation to Ironford, now seen as a pathetic attempt to buy mercy. Milo Barlow was sentenced to hard labor in the very northern mines he had helped starve of funds. Connections were traced, mid-level functionaries and merchants were arrested. The Vance name was whispered, but no direct link to Sila's was found. He was too careful, but the political ground beneath his family had turned to quicksand. Through it all, Thuron was immovable. The compassionate, compromising king was gone. In his place was the iron judge, letting the brutal process cleanse his house. On the final day of the tribunal, after the sentences were pronounced, Thuron summoned me to the map room one last time. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper, but his eyes were clear. The weary burden was still there, but it was now partnered with a grim purpose. "It is done," he said, "as much as it can ever be done. The rot is cut out, the wound is cauterized, it will leave a scar, on the kingdom, on the guard, on me." "And on me," I added quietly. He nodded. "Yes, you are no longer just Eris Thorn of the Wilderpine, you are the one who broke the Silverflow conspiracy, a hero to the borders, a threat to the old powers. Your life will never be simple again." "What happens now?" I asked. "Do I return to my cabin?" He was silent for a long time, looking out the window at his kingdom. "Do you want to?" I thought of my quiet forest, my simple life. I thought of Elian, now proudly wearing Varia's unit pin. I thought of ledgers and truths and the endless, necessary fight. The girl who wanted that simple life was gone. She had been reshaped in the forge of the citadel, tempered by betrayal and hard-won resolve. "No," I said, the word final. "My place is not there anymore." "Then your place is here," Thuron said, turning to face me, "but not as a guest, not as a prisoner, and not as a thorn." He took a deep breath. "I am creating a new office. The royal liaison for the borderlands, an advocate with a seat on the provisioning council, with the authority to inspect, to audit, to speak directly to the throne, the voice for the villages that have been silent for too long." He met my eyes. "It is yours if you will take it. It will be hard, they will fight you every step, but you will have my direct authority and my trust." It was more than I had ever dreamed, more than I had fought for. It was a chance to build, not just accuse, to heal, not just wound. I didn't hesitate. "I will take it." A faint, true smile touched his lips, the second I had ever seen. It transformed his face, banishing the king for a moment, revealing the man beneath. "Good." He walked to a cabinet and took out a small, flat box. He opened it. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, was a new brooch, not the stark wolf's head, but a silver thorn wrapped around a single, bright gem the color of the winter sky. It was beautiful and sharp and unyielding. "A symbol of your office," he said. "A thorn, yes, but one that is now part of the rose, a defender, not just a critic." He pinned it to my cloak himself, his fingers swift and sure. The weight of it was perfect. "Go," he said, his voice gentler now. "Go see your brother, he has been asking for you, then we have work to do. The tide is moving, Eris, and we have a kingdom to help it cleanse." I left the map room, the new brooch cool against my chest. I walked through the citadel halls, and the gazes that followed me were different. There was fear, yes, resentment, but also here and there a new respect, a nod from a guard. A curious, thoughtful look from a young scribe. I found Elian in the training yard, practicing drills with fierce concentration. He saw me and ran over, his face alight. "Eris, they say you were amazing, they say you brought down a whole conspiracy." I pulled him into a hug, holding him tight, my brother, my anchor, my reason. "We did it together," I murmured. "You were brave too." Later, I stood on a high balcony, looking out over the kingdom I had cursed, then fought for, and now would help to rule. The path had been brutal, it had cost me my innocence, my simplicity, and nearly my life, but it had given me a purpose, a voice, a family and a brother who was safe, and a king who, in his own hard way, had kept his word. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine from the distant forests. It was a clean wind, a wind of change. Justice was not a single event, it was a direction, a constant, difficult march. And I, Eris Thorne, the girl who wrote an angry letter, now had a place in the vanguard. The story of the rejected Omega who never meant to write to the king was over. A new story was beginning.